All right, and we are live. Sorry, guys, that we had to take this much time trying to set up, and there were a few hitches along the way. So today's conversation is going to be around what's the face of anti-black racism today. Stanley would usually say that I believe that we're living in a post-racial world. I don't think so. I don't believe we're living in a post-racial world. I think that racism is still very much around. The degree to which it is around may be different from what it was in the past, but I think it's still very much around. But even at that, just saying it's around, it's not enough. What are those specific things that we can see today and say, oh, this is racism or that is racism? What are those specific behaviors that one can say this is anti-black racism in in play today? So basically, that's what we're going to talk about today. And the I would say the inspiration for this stream today um, was drawn from Eleri. There was some articles that you shared in the Discord, and I thought they were quite interesting, and I wanted us to explore those articles today. So before we start proper, because I'll have to go out and come back in a bit. You guys can just both of
Before,
you can just talk.
before you leave, is it possible you could share my screen so I can play a video in regards to that question, and then I'll pause it and then talk about it.
Okay, that will be when I come back because I'm on my
Okay.
phone right now, so I want to get my
All right.
laptop. So I'll do it on my laptop, and then you should be able to share it from my laptop when I bring my laptop. So see you guys in a bit. So go ahead and just talk.
Sure. In my what Charles was talking about that he noticed was basically I was doing some research to find out if there was such a thing as institutional racism and systemic racism, and if it did exist, what did it look like? I decided to concentrate on the United Kingdom. I wasn't going to go to South Africa or check out resources in the United States of America. So basically, I decided how would I look for it? Where would I go? So the places that I ended up looking involved the prison system and the criminal justice system. So I decided to look at the people who were being taken into prison. What proportion was it being done disproportionately? And then I decided to actually go further and look at the people who were, implementing this justice, the judges, the solicitors, if there was any record of racism there. So that's where I based most of my current investigation, and I did come up with a lot of data, surprisingly, quite a lot quicker than I had assumed. I came up with data relating to the prisons, how certain people of ethnic minorities were being locked up and being given harsher sentences at a disproportional rate. I concentrated mainly on Black women, because usually when we talk about these things, by default, we always check what's happening with Black men. But in regards to the prison, I looked at what was happening with Black women, and I came across some data which I was planning to share and show people. And then I also looked and did some research and found some information on judges within the UK as well, and what was going on within that. So that's basically where both of my investigations today were, which is what Charles saw. But I don't know in regards to Steve and Stanley, do you think such a thing exists in America? Because I don't want to ask you about the UK, because I think that'd be unfair. Unless you've done your research on the UK, then you can go for it.
Well, no, you said you did. I'm now you got me curious.
Yes,
What did
yes.
the data show in the UK?
Okay, so in regards to the data that I was looking at in regards to women and being locked up in prisons, I was able to come across some data from an organization called the Prison Reform Trust. Now, what is the Prison Reform Trust? The Prison Reform Trust, it's an independent UK charity working to create a just, humane, and basically effective prison system. So they had been gathering data, trying to do research, and it was basically, they were one of the people that I utilized. But it was very interesting what they said. If I quote, Goes there. Says women from minority ethnic groups face many of the same challenges as white British women compared to men with the criminal justice system, including exposure to domestic or sexual abuse, problematic substance use, and the probability that they have the primary care of dependent children. This is the interesting part that came up, which surprised me. There is surprisingly little published information about the ethnicity of women in the criminal justice system. For example, we know the ethnic origin of those in prison on any given date, but not that of women received into prison over the course of a year, nor is information published on the ethnicity of women who are recalled back to prison following release, or of women who are on community orders. However, even the currently limited range of published statistics and survey evidence lays bare that there are real disparities. And their claim here, which I'm going to read out and then give you the data, says Black women are more likely than other women to be remanded or sentenced to custody. Black women are more likely to be sole parents, so their imprisonment has particular implication for children. Women from minority ethnic groups are more likely to plead not guilty in the Crown Court, leaving them open to potentially harsher sentencing. Women from minority ethnic groups feel less safe in custody and have less access to mental health support, according to surveys by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons. Women from minority ethnic groups experience racial and religious discrimination in prison from other prisoners and from staff, according to the surveys by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons. Some women from minority ethnic groups are also foreign nationals and may be subject to immigration control and face language and cultural barriers. And then this interesting part, it goes, Asian and Muslim women may experience particular acute stigma from their own communities. So this was the bulk of the claim that they were making. So I then continued to look more into the data, and I noticed a number of claims they were making. So they were saying things like, in regards to Black women, 3% of the total female population in England and Wales are Black women. It goes 6.7% of women entering the criminal justice system for the first time are Black women. And it goes 8.9% of the women's snapshot prison population are Black women, which is quite odd considering that 3% of the total female population of Black women
Can
in
I
England
can
and
I
Wales.
interrupt? When you say Black women, I
Mm.
know Black means a somewhat different in the UK. Is that Caribbean, Asian? Is there a more well finer comb? Do they mean African plus Caribbean? How is Black defined?
Sure. In regards to this documentation from the Prison Reform Trust, in regards to your question, they say in the context of official statistics, references to Black women tend to mean women of African or Caribbean descent. That's what they mean. But they also decided to create statistics as well for Asian women. But I can look at those ones. Those are also there, but they created one specifically for African or Caribbean women as well. So that's what they mean when they say Black. So that's what they're concentrating on for Black people.
I want to offer one thing though. Um, well, two things actually. The African, I think, or Caribbean, I can't remember if they're combined or separate, but you're talking 3% of the population. And Britain, in and of itself, since what? When was the Somerset decision? England proper, they don't have a history of slavery on their soil. So I want to say, and Steve may disagree with this, but it's not a one-to-one comparison. There has never been like major slavery in England or the British Isles that I know of. And I mean specifically African slavery. Um, I'm not real familiar with the Irish thing, so I'm not sure that that's a fair comparison when you compare crime statistics or the result of that sort of thing. I'm just not. I'm not comfortable with the comparison.
Comparison to whom?
Well, I tend to be a little bit of a U.S. person. Um, I'm not sure that the crime statistics of who is in jail is a proper comparison. When you say black in England in the penal system, I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure that it's something that is comparable to the legal system, the penal system in the U.S.
Oh,
Well,
yes, I would agree with that. My whole discussion today has absolutely nothing to do with the United States of America or comparing it to America. My discussion today is to talk about where I'm living, which is in England. So
you know,
none of what
I'm
I'm
gonna, I'm
saying
gonna.
today has anything to do with America, unless you have data from America. So,
Okay, I can leave it there.
So I think what Stanley is saying is that, well, let me go back there. Let me just say what I'm saying. I'm saying if there's a consistent disparity across the pond as there is here, then there may be, a conversation that we have to have about the similarities about racial disparities. However, I'm curious as to what the other demographics are involving incarceration rates, i.e., are we talking about a group of individuals that are more from a lower socioeconomic scale? Are we talking about a location? Are we talking about religious faith differences, like cultural expectations? You know what I mean? Because Asians in the same socioeconomic strata as racialized black here don't go to jail at the same rate. So is it targeted, or is it culture, or is it a combination of both, or is it a combination of all of those plus glaring blind spots within the judicial systems of both of these countries? Because the U.S. Judicial system is based largely off of English common law. So I'm sure there could be some crossovers there, but I'm just curious as to because what we're looking at is we're looking at results instead of things that cause the results. So I'm just kind of curious as what you found on that.
well, I haven't looked at things that cause the results. So, for instance, when we're talking about region, I mean, when I look at the data here, it goes there are marked local and regional variations. For example, in London, 9.8% of women are black, it claims, yet black women made up 20.7% of first-time entrants into the criminal justice system. So I was kind of curious about that data, who actually provided that data, and then discovered that it's from a newspaper called The Guardian. The other data I've got is from the Ministry of Justice itself. So I'm getting that data from them. But in regards to the whole thing about what led them into there, I don't know. What I do know is what happens when they get in there. And
Because I think my argument is really, is this a class problem, or is this a race problem, or are we conflating the two?
well, they could easily be both class and race, both of
Well,
I
them
would
my
agree with
mixed
my
that.
in
thing is
together.
with such a small population, um, I'm not sure you can know that.
Can know what about their
Well, whether it's
class?
a class problem, race problem, religion problem, um, how do you know with such a small population of black people?
When you say small population, how small do you think they are?
3%, um,
And
and
how much million? We're talking what that's like how
three
many million?
percent
Three
of
million, 3 million
basically
people.
England's population is non-white, or maybe it's Africans. I don't have the stats in front of me, but it's such a small sample
We're
that
talking
I'm
specifically
not
about
sure
black
you can
people.
draw a conclusion.
We're talking specifically of black people. When I say the numbers
Okay,
I've mentioned, I'm not talking about Asian people or Chinese or
okay.
Indian. I'm talking specifically about black. So even if you have, you
And
could even have
what
a
is the percentage of black people in England?
in England. Last time I checked, close to 3 million, maybe 3.5 million.
We're 30
Okay.
million here, and it's approximately almost 14% of our total population here in the U.S.
Right. And the last stat I heard was it's roughly 3%. And I'm specifically talking about England. And I'm shaky on the numbers, but it's such a small population that I'm not sure you can draw conclusions. That's my point, really. It
Well,
might be,
I
it
want to
might
side
not.
with Larry on this. Is that if the prison population is still overabundantly discriminating against people of color, specifically black, and in a nation where there's not very many of them, I think that's even something closer that we should look under a microscope at.
Yeah. And my point is it because of race? Is it because of class? We don't know. That is my
Right, right.
point.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to earlier.
Yep.
Is we just don't
And
know.
that
But
that is what the discussion is about. Because if you want to know if it's about race or class, the policeman or the judge are not going to stand in front of a camera and say, I gave out this sentence because they're black or because they're working class. If you're expecting that obvious some kind of admission of guilt, then I think that's maybe in
Right.
Disneyland that'll happen. So what we can look at
Understood.
is the data, and then people come to their conclusions whether they think it exists or it doesn't exist. But you'll never get an open admission of a
Okay.
racism from.
Then the bottom line is we don't know. We know there's a preponderance, but we don't know the cause.
well, I'm wondering if they have any studies, because here in the U.S. we did a study of different judges and their rulings by their gender, and female judges um, judged females harsher than did males. Male judges tended to let women off with less severe punishment, whereas the females would punish them even harder. So I think it's an interesting question to follow up on, but I'm just kind of curious if you found anything along those lines, Larry. And by the way, it's nice to see you again, Larry.
Thank you very much. I've got data as well, which I was going to discuss in regards to judges. Things that I found out. I came across an article in the newspaper. Discrimination is keeping UK bench white, say judges. 8 judges are calling for an inquiry into the old boys network that they say shuts minority applicants out of top jobs. So these are 8 judges who are going through this. He goes on to say a group of serving judges is calling for a parliamentary inquiry into claims of discrimination and bullying, saying it has led to ethnic minority judges missing out on top jobs. 8 judges who officiate in Crown, County, and Tribunal courts are seeking to expose systemic discrimination at the highest levels of the judiciary. The 8, mostly from minorities, call for an inquiry into discrimination, bullying, and leadership structures within the judiciary and of the system for appointment and promotion of judges. In a letter to the Sunday Times, they asked to remain anonymous as judges are not allowed to speak out against the legal system. But they have criticized the Judicial Appointments Commission for running a system that favors candidates from prosperous traditional backgrounds who are well connected. Because last year, those who applied to be judge were more likely to be shortlisted if they were white. The group said 33% of the white candidates were shortlisted and 16% of those from ethnic minorities, according to the judiciary data. So I've got that here. Apparently, this is going on. They're trying to do this right now. 8 judges in this country, which I found very interesting. I wasn't expecting to come up across that because I thought, people keep quiet. They don't talk about that. So I was very surprised I came across that court case.
I'm sorry, I was laughing due to the sirens in the background of someone's house.
Yeah,
that's talking about this stuff.
That's outside.
No, but that's really interesting. So even the judges are starting to be like, hey, something's kind of wonky here. We should be looking at this. But what
Charles,
I find more concerning is the fact that.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
Charles, are you there? Are you there now? No, because I wanted to show you guys the data. Yep. I just wanted to share my screen because I want to share the data with Steve.
Are you sharing from a laptop?
Yes, I am.
Okay. try and see if you can share. Just look for, I think the share button also.
Yeah,
See
there
if you
should be a
can
share
share.
button down at the bottom.
Yep, I've
Yeah.
clicked on that.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is the information I was looking at. Thanks very much. This was in regards to the discrimination which these judges were claiming. 8 judges are calling for an inquiry into the Old Boys Network, which surprised me a lot. And this man here goes by the name of Nasir Afzal, who is the former chief prosecutor for Northwest England, and says he has been told of troubling accounts of discrimination and bullying. The exact nature of this stuff, the claim that is being made by these 8 judges, is as follows. The judges claim to have seen a white judge performing an imitation of a witness of Chinese origin using racist words and gestures, with hands used to distort the eyes, using a mock accent. A second white judge making disparaging and racist remarks about an Asian barrister, mimicking their accent in private conversations. White immigration judges who boasted in private about how many asylum seeker applications they had refused and ridiculed accounts of persecution based on the person's race. It goes on here, a system of secret soundings. What does that mean? Where senior judges can provide informal anecdotes about candidates, which the group says is an old boys network and breeding ground for discrimination. All right. That's interesting. They even have some chart here, percentage of candidates for top legal positions who are from a black and ethnic minority background. So the eligible edge candidates and everything. So yeah, that's one thing I came across in regards to the judiciary, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting this. It says last week, Nazir Afzal, the former chief prosecutor for Northwest England, who brought down a number of Asian grooming gangs, said, for some time now, I have been approached by judges across the country who have shared extremely troubling accounts of discrimination and bullying by their leaders, which have led some to suicidal thoughts and ill health. Now, the thing about this is that these people are judges. And if we're hearing here that there is racism, what chance does a non-white person stand if they're in front of one of these judges in a court of law? One can easily come to the conclusion that, the decision would go against them, not because of evidence, but simply because of their ethnicity, which is quite worrying. And I came across another judge, this judge here. Retired Judge Peter Herbert settles race claim against judiciary. Barrister who chairs Society of Black Lawyers says he has successfully held senior judges to account. So this is a judge, one of the few non-white judges in England. There aren't that many because, as was pointed out earlier, the population of Black people in England is a lot smaller than other parts of the world. Goes on here, this man's name is Peter Herbert, barrister and independent member of the Metropolitan Police Authority. A retired Black judge has settled a high-profile claim of racism against the judiciary just days before the case was due to be heard in court, saying that he has successfully held senior judges to account. Peter Herbert was due to bring claims of racism, victimization, and harassment against the judiciary in an employment tribunal on Monday. However, the Lord Chief Justice and Lord Chancellor have confirmed to The Guardian that the case has already been settled. So this is interesting. This is what we have called legal speak. So what does it mean if it's been settled? Here it goes. The 2 senior figures in the judiciary say the settlement was made with no acceptance of liability or wrongdoing on their part. This is what happens when you settle things and it doesn't go to court. So this is another case that I came across. This judge who was taking the authorities to task. So I came across these 2 cases within the judges. So I don't know, me personally, I have to be suspicious when I see these types of things. I don't know if people are willing to just put them aside and say they don't really mean that much. I don't know. But Charles, Steve, you guys, what do you think? You think it's they're just whistling in the wind, or maybe there is Some smoke there without fire.
I think it's good to keep people's feet to the fire and to keep our eyes on what could possibly be poor behavior. Because if we just accept that something is okay, then I mean, obviously problems go unnoticed and harm is committed. So I'm perfectly fine with the idea of judges like that dude to continue really kind of pushing to make sure that there's systems in place where we can view whether or not discrimination is occurring. The thing that I look at here is that why would you settle before it gets to court? Now some would say, well, because
Yes, good
there's
question.
nothing there, and then others would say, well, they want to keep it quiet. Well, keeping it quiet doesn't make sense when you've made so much bloody noise. You know what I'm saying? So my assumption is there's not enough there yet to make a loud enough push. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, I did find that as a bit of an anticlimax. That whole
Yeah,
that whole thing when he settled, I thought, oh, great, that's great.
right. You're
I
like,
wanted to
yeah. Oh,
I wanted to play this for you guys right at the beginning before we got into the whole discussion of the judges and it was in regards to anti-black racism. This I came across, which purely by accident. This is basically, for those who don't know, there's a war that's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Russia's invading parts of Ukraine. And I came across this because I was told that there were people, Africans, who were trying to get out because you can't get on an airplane. You can't use the airport because there's a war going on. So they have to catch trains to go from Ukraine to the neighboring countries and then make their way to the airport. And apparently there was a prejudice which was being done. So I'm just going to play this and so you can see it.
Black girl go, they're pushing her, they're not letting her go, they're not letting her go. Black girl go, they're pushing her, they're not letting her go, they're not letting her go. Is it right? Is it right? They're not letting the black girl go. They're not letting the black girl go. They're not letting the black girl go. They're not letting the black girl.
There have been an uproar after details emerged that Black Africans in Ukraine are being denied entry into trains that are supposed to ship them away from Ukraine to neighboring countries. And the fact that there are no air travel, the only way out of Ukraine is to connect to any neighboring country to the west, and then, of course, take your plane back to your home country. So the only mode of transport left are the trains that connect Ukraine to neighboring countries like Poland. But Africans are being denied entry into those trains. Away from the trains, even those Africans who are lucky enough to get or to trek their way to the Polish border, they are not guaranteed entry. Poland is denying Africans direct entry into their country.
These are the black community here. They are not allowing any black people to enter inside the gates. We are all here. It's only Ukrainians that they are allowing in. Even the ones with kids, they're not allowing them in. They only have to hear. For days, and nobody's asking any questions. Only Ukrainian women and kids they are allowing in through these gates. All the places blocked and all are full of black from different communities, from different countries. Nobody's talking to us.
One Twitter user said that Poland says white people can come with no documents, no COVID-19 test, and you can even bring your dog. But don't bring Africans. And the only passport refugees need to enter Poland is whiteness. Another Twitter user said that she has been at the Ukraine-Polish border for the past 5 hours and that they were separating Ukrainians on one side and Africans on the other, and that the criteria was they allow 100 Ukrainians first before they allow like 2 Africans to cross, and then on and on. And she was wondering that if they allow a lot of Ukrainians to cross before foreigners, then who will be left to fight for Ukrainians? Ukraine has been home to more than 8,000 Moroccans, more than 4,000 Nigerians, more than 800 Ghanaians, more than 600 Kenyans, more than 500 South Africans, and so on and so on. And most of these people are students doing university courses in Ukraine, and they are stuck behind enemy lines.
Yeah, just wanted to share that piece of information that's happening apparently right now, which I have to be honest, it didn't really surprise me. But that's in regards to Charles's question of the day. I guess that can be used in regards to discussing, what does anti-black racism look like today? You can look at that as well.
My guess is Charles is Paul Mooney would have a couple comments.
Yeah, Paul Mooney certainly would have. He would not have been short any criticism.
Stanley, could you say
on
that again?
Well, I'm sorry. I guess I would wonder how Paul Mooney would describe that video. It's a game of small percentages.
I don't know who Paul Mooney is.
He's an American comedian, very brash, very not PC about his feelings,
and very smart. He
very
wrote
smart,
a
very
lot
intelligent.
of Richard Pryor stuff.
Yeah. The thing that I look at there in that video, and it's so disturbing that they're segregating people again by what they look like, and that's what it looks like on the surface. I don't know if there's any other kind of circumstances that are playing into this. Like, are they trying to get more people out who are at risk, like children, women, Jews? You get what I'm saying? It's like, who's on the train, and why are they keeping racialized black folk off the train? And
black people, they are not allowing them. We know that part.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it says it in the video, but I'm not clear as to why or what the reason is that they're segregating them.
Why does it matter? We know
No,
the position
to me
of
it
the
doesn't.
train and who they're letting in.
Yeah.
Sometimes why is not the important question, Steve.
Well, I think the why is always an important question, so we can keep it from happening again. But
especially
in this case, I'm with you. I think they should
both.
I think they should let everybody on the damn train, black, white, Asian, whatever. I think that's the appropriate way to go. But well, that's what I'm asking is like, why is that happening? Like, it's an important question to ask.
They don't think black people need to be on the train. What would that be called?
Well, I think we all know what that would be called, but that's not the question I'm asking.
Well,
I'm just asking
why are we
for more detail.
Why then?
I'm asking for more detail.
Why they're not being allowed on the train.
Well, I'm just asking for more detail. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not criticizing you or Larry or anybody else.
You're criticizing. You asked why. I think you know why. So why is it why? We know. And I will say this, it is Poland. It goes back to my argument about percentages. It's a small population. Maybe they're just not knowing that black people are human too. And I can loop this back into so much of European history easily.
Yeah, I'm concerned because Russians have not traditionally been kind to racialized black folk. I mean, if you go there today, chances are you won't even see one. They are extremely prejudiced against racialized black people in Russia, and always have been. Even the communist apologizers don't realize the number of racialized black folk who tried to run to Soviet Russia to escape
but that's the point.
Jim Crow here, and then they ended up in the gulags, right? So I'm concerned about that. And honestly, I would have shipped those individuals, the racialized black folk there in Ukraine. I would have shipped them out first, but like, we got to get these guys out of here, right?
Well, of course you would.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Hey, what's up, Ogie?
Hey, how you guys doing? Charles,
Hello.
Larry, Stanley,
Hello. Greetings.
Steve. Yeah, appreciate you guys. So I think I came on at a very opportune moment because I also have been following the developments in Ukraine, and one thing I want to say, obviously, I think in line with what Steve and even Stanley are you're saying, is that we can't deny that there is racial prejudice within these societies.
Can we fix it?
Can we fix it? You know what? Before I get to that, let me say this, because there are two reports that I assessed. One was from Al Jazeera, and with this report, it paints that some Africans have actually gotten out to Poland, and I've been allowed in. Just 1 second here. And so it says here, at my university, is a quote, at my university, there are about 100 Nigerian students. I am sheltering with them. Some of them, Lawal's added. Some students have managed to cross the border into Poland. I live in Kiev. I have been living here since March last year. Some Taora, a student at State University of Telecommunications in Kiev, told Al Jazeera. And there was one account that I found very interesting, which was, okay, so I'm just going to read his quote. He said, as he neared the Polish border, Samuel's luck ran out. Apparently, this guy was driving to the border. He said he had a minor road accident with a vehicle carrying Ukrainians because the road was narrow. He said they took his money and stopped him from driving further. And then he says, he quotes, "They are not officials, police or military. They are normal citizens who stopped us Africans from driving to the border. They let Ukrainians pass, but not us," right? So he says, "I am walking to the border and I have no other options, blah, 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 blah." Then there was another account of an...
Well, wait, can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Did he add the part about, I love the country, I want to come back and visit?
No, unfortunately, he didn't. Let me add this. Let me just quickly pull this other report up real quick, which was interesting because this reflected experience shared by East Indian gentleman who was basically saying he was stopped at the border. Oh, 1 second. Sorry. I'm just trying to. So they said the Poland border. So they said, which this kind of also highlights a political side of things. Said the Poland border force spokesperson had said they were allowing anyone to enter Poland from Ukraine. A similar problem was faced by Indian students stranded at the Poland-Ukraine border. Reportedly, the Indian students have not been allowed to cross the border and were told, when your government has not cooperated with us, why should we cooperate with you?
May I ask you a question on that
That's
specific
inhuman.
point?
Yeah.
Are we making comparisons?
Not exactly. We're not making comparisons, but like Stanley, you would be very appreciative of, is that we have to recognize these things, one, within context. This is a war. This is a war-torn country, or sorry, yeah, I mean, war is happening in the country, and people are mostly not on their best during times of chaos, right? So I think for me, what spoke volumes from one of what the other gentleman was saying is, now you find private citizens taking it into their hands
And dropping people off at borders.
To actually stop people from getting to the borders.
I see.
Which for me kind of ties into this individual component of racism. right? Of people just, deciding to go use their baser instincts to drum up a whole bunch of problems. However, I must end this in a positive note. The Nigerian government, just one second here, the Nigerian government, which I think should have been the first thing done, as Steve was saying, the Nigerian government has written a response or letter, public notice from the Nigerian embassy in Poland. In light of the recent happenings in Ukraine, please be advised that all Nigerians crossing over to Poland would have staff of the Nigerian embassy waiting for them. The federal government of Nigeria is making
At
necessary
the
arrangements
borders?
at the border, at the Polish border, for the evacuation of those stranded in Ukraine through the embassy in Warsaw, Poland. Please, so so there are multiple. It seems there are multiple aspects to this situation. One is obviously just flat out racism, flat out hydra of racism being perpetuated at the individual level. Another part is more the systemic, which is like nation to nation peace, which is also kind of coming out. But I think for us to, really, I guess, recognize or understand the complexities of what's going on, we kind of have to do it within the nuances.
May I ask you a huge question?
Sure.
Essentially, what you're saying is let us all turn the other cheek and be forgiving because it is war and people are not on their best.
Let us all be forgiven. No, not at all. I'm just basically how'd I put it? Analyzing it for what it is, right?
You're not analyzing, you're forgiving.
No, not at all. I have like the way I see it is this, okay? Ukraine has a significant influx of African/Nigerian immigrants who go there to study. So these are individuals who the Ukrainian government has seen to have value, right? They're doctors, these are people who are seen to be contributing in some form of economic, intellectual way. However, this doesn't mean that they wouldn't experience discriminatory practice being levied by, because right now we're speculating,
Especially when they're running for their lives.
and that's I think what most of the videos reveal is that there are elements of the Ukrainian public who are taking these things into their own hand. You see what I'm saying? It's complex because this is firsthand account saying a bunch of people stopped me while I was going to the border. They robbed me, and they're not public officials. These are citizens. So, however we make sense of that, we just basically have to deal with that which is in front of us. No one's saying forgive. I'm just saying we have to recognize how these things operate in context.
Well, I have to give you a huge compliment. You are taking things in context, and boy, I can only compliment you.
Back in the day, this used to be called what would be called a fluid situation.
Yeah,
that was political speak for we have no idea what the hell's going on, and we know some stuff's going on that we don't like, but we don't know why. And it's basically a catch-all excuse as to,
yeah,
you know what I mean.
Which is why I said earlier, unless you get someone standing in front of a camera and telling you that they're doing it because they're racist, you'll never know.
These people are.
Sorry, Stanley, you were saying?
I understand the turn the other cheek mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much all I have to say, but it does not always work.
Yeah, but Stanley, that's the thing, right? Like I don't even think I'm arguing or proposing for turn the other cheek. Because for me,
The
what
problem is you're
yeah.
not arguing a point. You are standing a middle ground
Hmm.
that makes no sense in the middle of a war. You I'm gonna be honest here.
Hmm.
You are defending
Hmm.
racist behavior as,
Okay.
oh, I don't know because we don't know their hearts. And I really have a problem with that.
No, 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 Stanley. I'm not defending racist behavior. I'm just recounting the accounts.
No, when you say accounting,
Hmm.
you are defending.
No, I'm not. You're not going to put words in my mouth. I know exactly
I
what I'm
don't
speaking on.
need to put words in your mouth.
Hmm.
You are implying
Implying what?
defense
No.
of racist behavior, make the best out of a war,
Hmm.
and you have no clue, quite frankly.
No clue about what.
War.
Okay, so in war, based on the clue that you have, because I know you were in the Navy. You is that in war are people gentlemen all through? Are we the best human beings during war?
Don't know.
Okay.
I'm waiting for you to tell me to turn the other cheek.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm just
All
basically
right,
reading
I am
firsthand
let
not
me get
accounts.
the
into
question in.
platitudes, son.
Let me get the question in. So, this is the way I see it. It's a very clear cut thing. This is the way I see racism. Given similar circumstances, are people being treated differently on the basis of their skin color or the basis of their ethnicity? If the answer is yes, then I don't think there's any nuancing it. I don't think there's any trying to understand any situation, anything on the line that. So, if the Ukrainians are being let in, the white Ukrainians are being let in, and the black people from coming from Ukraine are not being let in, there's nothing you're going to tell me around that would tell me that this is not racism, that there's some other factors at play, especially when it gets to do with a country like Poland. And why I would say this is that although I haven't seen videos of Poland being racist to black or discriminatory to black people, I have seen videos of Poland talking about Muslim immigrants and all that, and how they want just Christian immigrants, and they don't want people from the Middle East. And this was coming um, from a government official. So you can easily just stretch that line to include African immigrants and all that. So if this is the case that they're letting in white Ukrainians in and they're not letting in um, black people from Ukraine, then it's a clear case of racism, and there is no nuance in that. However, um, even though this is one case that we've seen, I want us to not just center this conversation around what's happening in Ukraine, because this is sort of a one-off thing. I want us to look at how racism plays out on a normal day in without a war situation, interacting in normal living in the Western world. How does
Sure.
it really
There's
play out? What are those examples that we can come up with? So
Sure. There's a video I wanted to play. It ties in with what Steve was talking to me about earlier when he was asking questions about could it be a class or could it be race, and this, and it's actually from a different point of view in regards to whether there is such a thing as institutional racism or systemic racism, or if racism does exist on a large scale in the UK as we think. And I just wanted to play that video because it deals directly with your question again, Charles. So I don't know if you could allow me to share my screen and play the video.
sure, go ahead.
A collective cry for change that gripped the world and filled the streets last summer. But was anyone listening? In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, the government put together a commission to look into racial inequality in Britain. Today, they released their findings, claiming that far from having a problem, the UK is a world leader when it comes to eradicating racism.
There are disparities. The interesting thing about this report is that it doesn't find those disparities landing in racism. It actually finds them in a lot of other things.
The report found no evidence of institutional racism, that inequalities are more likely to be caused by geography, poverty, and culture than race, and that ethnic minorities are haunted by historic racism that doesn't exist anymore in modern Britain.
I assume you've had people come to you during this process who've said to you that they feel that their lived experience is one of institutional racism. Clearly, you don't believe them. Are they lying? Are they deluded?
At the moment, people are just going around declaring institutional racism. Recently, somebody has declared that the whole education system is institutionally racist. And what they've done, they've devalued the term.
We look suspicious.
Figures show that black people are 9 times more likely than white people to be stopped and searched by the police. Dr. Sewell says that's not due to racism, but to high levels of crime within the black community itself.
We need to go back and look at issues around how they've been brought up, what's the socioeconomic issues around them, family strain, some of the mistrust, some of the issues around masculinity, which have nothing to do with racism, because it's black men killing each other.
Simon Woolley is a former government advisor on race.
I find some of the language used by this report appalling. The idea that it's in our heads, this historical legacy that doesn't allow us to move forward, denies the lived experience of being stopped and searched 10 times more likely than other people.
After last year's protests, the Commission says it wants to see a major shift in the race debate that even appears to include rewriting the narrative on slavery. The report states, there is a new story about the Caribbean experience which speaks to the slave period not only being about profit and suffering, but how culturally African people transformed themselves into a remodelled African Britain. It's all very different from the tone taken just a few years ago under Theresa May, when she promised to tackle Britain's burning injustices.
If you're black, you're treated more harshly by the criminal justice system than if you're white.
Now Number 10 is engaged in what insiders have described as a war on wokeness, spearheaded by policy chief Munira Mirza, who has questioned whether structural racism even exists, as has the Equalities Minister, who was questioned today over whether the Commission is genuinely independent.
All but one were from an ethnic minority background, ranging from West African to Pakistani. They were very much independent, but the Prime Minister did ask for the report. He commissioned it.
Lovely place, lovely day.
Food for thought. So from what Tony Sewell was saying, he didn't really want to believe that it was racism. As far as he was saying, it had to do it had to do with those people being in an environment where there was a high level of crime, which kind of, in his opinion, justified why there was a lot of stop and search. And it was like, you happen to be living in an area where there's a lot of crime, and there, as he said, a lot of black people killing black people. He mentioned that. And in the report, there was another report that mentioned it had nothing to do with the race. It was more about poverty and culture. So these kind of inequality, it wasn't racially based or ethnically based. It was more class based, basically tying into poverty. So it was interesting hearing that. So I wanted to play that so you got to see these different views within the UK. You saw this black man who didn't accept the whole thing about structural racism or institutional racism. And you saw another black man whose name I've forgotten, who was against what you were saying. And then you saw the lady who's an MP, Kemi Badenoch or something, wearing the glasses. She's a Tory MP. She also had serious questions about it. She was a black woman. But it was interesting that we also did see the image of the last Prime Minister of the UK, who was openly saying that if you are black, that you will be treated differently. So it was interesting hearing all those different comments. But the reason I played it was to let you, to give you a view into in the UK in the sense that there is almost like a civil war going on in this topic that Charles has brought up. There are those who believe it does exist, and there are those who are not convinced that it exists. And the people who choose not to believe are not just white people. You also have black people as well, and brown people. And the people who choose to believe it exists are a mixture of black and white and brown. So it's which one of them
she
is
said
right?
that the whole commission
I'm
was
interested,
of
Larry,
racialized
what do
people.
you believe?
Sorry, Stanley. What were you saying, Steve?
I was saying it was interesting that she said that everybody on that commission were from a different racialized background, but because it was commissioned by a white individual, all of a sudden that makes it questionable. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Or am I missing something?
No, you're not. No, that's a
Because
interesting
like,
point.
the Sewell guy was interesting. Like, I can't remember the guy's name that came after him, but
Yeah,
you know,
crazy.
it's one thing to, you know, we should listen to lived experiences to a certain degree because they're good indicators of what's going on, what's happening on the ground. But to determine or to dictate based off of those, the primacy of identity is I think is the wrong way to go, because the primacy of identity doesn't really take into account factual information. It just takes what our subjective perception of the situation is.
Yes,
And
I
Eric
would
Smith
agree.
writes about this really well in his book, Critique of Anti-Racism in Composition and Rhetoric.
I would agree with what you're saying in regards to lived experiences. What I'm going to say ties in with Stanley's question as well, because he asked me what's my opinion. Me personally, I believe that that it does exist. When I was a teenager, they used to use the word institutional racism. Now they call it systemic or some. I do believe it exists. But tying in with what Steve has said, the way I choose to prove it exists is by ignoring lived experiences. And I look more for what I consider like data to help. That's why I was showing you what the judges were saying and how 8 judges were pushing for an inquiry. And then I was talking about the documentation I had from the prison system in regards to black women in the UK. So I look at those types of things to try and gauge whether such a problem exists. Because as you said, with lived experience, there is a risk that you could be looking at something which is subjective and it's not necessarily objectively true. So the police might have stopped that black person, but was it because of race? Or maybe that there was a genuine good reason. So I tend not to look at that because it gets quite murky, the lived experience. So I go for the kind of data that I was talking about. So I showed you the stuff about the judges. I didn't get to show you the stuff about the prison. I talked to you about it, but I've still got the stuff up here so I can show you. But that's what I do.
Sorry, go ahead, Stanley.
Charles and Steve, and well, I guess everyone. In the U.S., you know about the wealth gap, like being able to afford good lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a poor black man, woman, but mostly men, how does the wealth gap loop back into a legal defense? Any ideas? And this is my point about systemic racism, actually.
I'm not
OJ
following your
Simpson.
question.
I'm sorry.
So your point is because of discrimination in the past,
No.
which has led to, let me finish making my point. Because of discrimination, because of racism, because of whatever, which has led to black people being economically disadvantaged, it plays it plays negatively today when a black person has to get a defense lawyer. They are not able to afford the best lawyers because they are not
Yes.
in a financial position to do so, right?
OJ Simpson could do it.
Okay.
The average black man, you know, who's not that rich. My thing about systemic racism is there's a
I haven't
wealth
finished my
disparity.
I haven't answered your question. I was
Okay.
just laying the foundation to see if I got what you were driving at. Okay, so
Well, I don't know that I'm
two things.
driving.
Two things. One, I would respond with the way I've seen Saul respond to something like this, where he said, "Well, it's life. It isn't that the system is rigged against you. It's life. Um, Life happened that you are in this position, not because this system currently is rigged against you, not because it's discriminating against you, but because of factors which are not under your control has
Mhm.
brought you to this position where you are now disadvantaged. Then number
And
two,
here's my response.
let
Can
me finish.
daddy drag you out of the life you led? My point
Can who?
stands. If you cannot pull an OJ,
Let me finish my point. So the second point, which is something you are alluding to, that OJ Simpson could afford a good lawyer. Now, I don't think it's the case that every white person can afford a good lawyer, and I don't think it's the case
um,
that every black person cannot afford a good lawyer. So it's not a race thing; it's a socioeconomic thing. So I would not look at it in that regard and say this is a race thing. It's a travesty that you cannot get good representation if you are not financially buoyant. That's a big problem, and that should be dealt with. But
right.
looking at it from the racial angle, it's not usually my go-to
So
way
it's
of looking at such
so
things.
being able to afford a legal defense is not a race thing. Is that what you're saying, Charles?
Yeah, it's not a race thing;
Okay.
it's a
I'll leave it
socioeconomic thing.
there because my guess is that there are, if you want to look at a per capita thing, there are more um, poor black people. The wealth disparity is there. You do not have a bunch of money to afford the best lawyers to get you off of anything. Um, so you
I
you
agree.
will you, please let me finish. So it is a class thing, correct?
It's a socioeconomic thing.
Okay. And who's at the bottom of the hill socioeconomically?
Young
Well,
people.
somebody has to be at the bottom. It may not be
Well,
by
then,
design, but somebody else has to be at the bottom. Even in
you know
societies
what?
that
I will explain that to black people in America. Somebody has to be at the bottom. Wonderful. Love the logic.
So I think
uh,
what the argument Charles is trying to make here is that the reason why there's such a disparity at the lower end of the age distribution is because when we're younger, we make dumber decisions. I know I did. I know many of us did. And you
Irrelevant.
don't generally have a lot of money at 22, 23,
Irrelevant.
24 years old. Now, if you
There
look at
are
the
people
as
who
people
are
get
young
older,
who can afford that kind of defense.
I couldn't have afforded it
wait,
at 24.
Well,
But
you're
as I'm
not a billionaire.
right, but if I can finish, the what we do see is that we see as people get older, their wealth
See,
increases.
you see the flaw in that argument, I hope.
What flaw in what argument?
Um, if we
'Cause
really want to talk about wealth, like generational wealth, my guess is more.
Stanley, what? Why are we not talking about income? Why are we talking about
My
generational wealth?
point is that black people tend to have less good representation than white people in the American justice system. That's sheer numbers. I don't
Okay,
have
so
to
where's the
provide
where's the
data.
where's
It
where's the data? No, you sort of have to
No,
provide
you know
data to
what?
show.
If I have to provide data that there are percentage wise more black people that are poor and cannot afford good lawyers? If I have to provide data, then I have lost the argument.
Um, okay, if you're looking at it percentage wise, the data may show that percentage wise
Per
more
capita
black people.
wise.
But if you're looking at it in terms of absolutes, you might actually find that there are more
So
white
the
people
legal
who
system
cannot
is
afford
equal.
good representation.
Is that what you're saying? That my
I didn't get
argument
that.
is wrong?
What did you say?
Black people cannot afford, on a person to person basis, the type of legal defense that white people can.
No, I don't.
Is
I
that
don't.
a
I don't
right or
believe that.
wrong thing?
That's a wrong statement because black
Okay.
people are not one person. White people are not one person. You have to look
Okay.
at it on an
So
individual and a case
essentially,
by case
what you're
basis.
saying is being able to afford competent legal defense is an
Stanley, I
equal
believe I
playing
believe
field.
you can afford
I'm
competent
not
or
your
legal
average
defense.
black person in the hood, sir.
Oh, good, good. So there are exceptions. So it means
Of
that
course
if
there
you
are.
can afford it,
Of
there
course
are there
there
are
are.
white people also that
There
cannot
are
afford good
exceptions to
representation.
white
But you're
people who
making it
can't.
seem no, you're making it seem as if black people on the whole cannot afford good representation.
Yes, that
That's
is
why they
my
are
point.
failing
That
the prison
is my
systems.
point.
And white people,
Black
well, I don't
people
agree with your point. I think your point is
as a
false.
whole cannot afford the same level of competent representation in the courtroom than white people can. That's fundamental.
That's an opinion.
And that, it's not an opinion, it is systemic racism, sir.
It's not.
Okay. Whatever
Yeah.
you say, Paul.
Yeah. Stanley, I don't know. The generalizations is one thing, right? Like,
Ogie, this isn't the time to chime in.
oh no, sorry, I will chime in. I will 100% chime in. If you don't want to listen, you can mute your mic.
Okay, go ahead.
So just even on the conversation of like intergenerational wealth, the reason why I find it so conflatory is it almost sounds like intergenerational wealth fixes everything. But then I could,
It
but then Stanley,
explains, it doesn't fix.
Stanley,
There is a difference, sir.
Stanley, let him
um,
make his points. When he's done, you can answer, you can question him, cross question,
yeah,
and all that.
yeah.
So let him finish his
So,
point.
so for me, the way I look at intergenerational wealth, or the possibility or potential of intergenerational wealth, is I try to localize it a bit. So I'll localize it in context of the most populated quote unquote black country, 200 million people, Nigerians. How many people? I mean, this from how Stanley argues it seems to be that thing that kind of fixes it all. So the question is, how many people within just a quote unquote racialized black country have access to intergenerational wealth?
You lost the argument with
Uh,
racialized. Is
Well,
Nigeria racialized or is America?
Sorry?
Is Nigeria racialized or is the USA?
100% is what's the racial designation for describing Nigeria, for the population of
In
Nigeria?
America or Nigeria? That's my
In
question.
in
That is my question.
Stanley,
Is Nigeria racialized or is the US?
in my opinion, it is 100%.
So Nigeria is racialized.
Anyways, as I was saying,
Skip over the question.
Stanley,
Awesome.
I already gave you an answer. The racial.
Yes or no, sir?
Yeah, I already gave you an answer, Stanley.
Nigeria
Even
is
even
racialized.
if
Oh my days.
let's Nigeria is not racialized, but the point still stands that
It
if
does
you're looking
not.
at it, it
No,
does. It
Charles,
does.
Charles, sorry, I'm actually getting to a point with Stanley because Stanley's not going
All right, go
to
ahead.
just basically
No,
switch things up.
I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you go, Ogie. I want to hear this.
Okay. Stanley, I already said it. Nigeria, in the context of the explanation I'm giving, yes, it is
You talk
racialized.
context, but not reality.
Stanley, let me ask you a question. How would you describe Charles?
Charles?
Yeah. How would you describe him phenotypically?
Charles?
Mm-hmm.
You make the mistake of thinking that everyone thinks like you.
Oh my goodness.
That is your problem, sir.
Okay. Anyways, I'll go ahead to make my point. I already gave you the answer. So in the context of a racialized society like Nigeria, we need to ask ourselves, okay, how does
Nigeria is not racialized?
Okay. Are you done?
Okay, let me jump in real quick. Hey, Stanley. You gotta let people talk, Stanley. I actually agree with a lot of points you're saying, Stanley. But if you don't let people talk and if you're being rude, it doesn't necessarily help the conversation. Because I understand your point, Stanley. Because America's different than Nigeria. But then again, I would say Nigeria is racialized. I don't know if it's legally racialized as much. Because because you're in the African continent doesn't mean you can't be racialized. Because Sierra Leone is legally racialized. Sierra Leone is heavily racialized in our laws. Even in our laws, in our legal records.
Racialized.
What you said?
Tribalized or racialized?
Racialized. Negro. We're a Negro nation by law.
That's Mr. Pelu. You know, I mean, like I said, the explanation I was given is obviously in context. I understand what Stanley is saying far better than I think Stanley does. But what I wouldn't let Stanley do is basically try to take over the conversation like I'm not saying something that makes sense. Everybody here knows that when you're referring to when the West or anyone is referring to the population in Africa, they use the racial designation black. It's as simple as that.
And I'm gonna give a real world example. Sierra Leone is racialized as black in Sierra Leonean law.
There you go.
It literally says Negro. It says Negro. You have to be of Negro African descent to be a citizen of Sierra Leone.
Let me jump in. I know where Stanley is coming from. Okay, I think he has a point.
I know where he's coming from too, Charles.
Let me see if I can break down. Let me see if I can break down his point. His point is Nigeria is a homogeneous black nation.
I agree.
Yes, the US is a multicultural nation where race and racism played a very important part in their history. So when you're talking about if you're talking about people in Nigeria not having wealth and all that, it may not be a consequence of any form of legalized discrimination from another race. But in America, you can easily tie it to discriminatory practices, slavery, Jim Crow, and all that. So in that sense, it might not be an equal comparison. You understand? Because both countries' history, they are different.
I know, I get that, and the point was not even to make an equal comparison. I was using that example in context of trying to draw out the significance of the wealth gap. That basically Stanley has no argument with that. That's basically what I was trying to
say. But I do think both your arguments sort of kind of work. I do think Stanley's argument does even work in Africa because Africa's poorer than most of the rest of the world, and there's the reasons for that, right? Our geography, our everything, our development. Africa is poor, and people of African descent are generationally less richer than other people because of Africa's poverty. I do believe that. I believe this for hundreds of years. This has been going on for hundreds of years. I think I think people of African descent are systematically poorer or generationally. I don't know the right words. I know something. I know the words matter a lot in these conversations because everybody's gonna pick up words. Because I didn't plan on having this conversation. I'm just jumping in, so I didn't pick the right words. But I do think that Africans are generationally poorer than most other regions of the world, and sub-Saharan Africans in particular are, because of many historical reasons of geography, limitations, and all the other stuff. They were, and it does play even into descendants outside of Africa. I do think it does play a part. I think generational wealth does play a part in legal representation. I definitely do think it does.
Yeah. I was honestly, Mr. Prillo, thanks for saying that, going to actually shift the conversation to what Charles was actually trying to shift it to, which is we're going to have to look at day-to-day income, right? Because the whole conversation of intergenerational wealth, I just feel muddies the waters, right? You can't, like, the intergenerational wealth that we're talking about, the people that have it are people that are within the 1%. You can't have 1% with access to that intergenerational wealth and think somehow the other side of the population, the 99%, how does the conversation of intergenerational wealth even apply when we know that when we're
It
talking
does.
about
It does. It does. It does. I think it still does. And I'm gonna tell you why I think it still does. Because
Okay.
wealth
Let
is
him
more
finish
than just
first.
cold hard cash. Wealth is
Mhm.
more than cold hard cash. Wealth is social capital, cultural capital, societal
Mhm.
capital. Like, America was built on white social capital.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So it's more than just cold hard cash. Yes, wealth is more than cold hard cash. If you want to look at income, cold hard cash, and that's the only way you dimension you want to look at wealth, you'll be missing the relevance of all other forms of capital. And white people have way more forms of capital, generally speaking, in the world than blacks do. It's just a fact from geography and history. And it plays a part all the way to in America, and even the descendants all the way to this day. It does play a part. I do think it does play a part. I think civilizational, cultural, everything capital plays a part into all that, and white people have it at a higher level than blacks at this point. They just do. Blacks have to catch up.
Okay, I get that, Mr. Prelude, but in context of Stanley's argument, he was basically talking about intergenerational wealth in terms of cash, money and
Yes,
access
but
to.
How do you think wealth gets passed on?
exactly. Stanley does have a. I get the point Stanley's making.
Jesus.
It does. Stanley's actually right. The only
Right.
problem with Stanley that he's rude. He's rude, but he's actually right. But he's
Well,
rude as
no,
well.
you know what? I'll shut up.
Can I pipe in here real quick?
Sure.
So there's a couple of dimensions that we're not looking at here, and I'm going to partially agree with Stanley and partially disagree with Stanley on the note that the racialized black population of the United States, 24% of which is in the poverty line. Okay, if you take the Hispanic
Did you
American,
say 24%?
24%
Stanley,
according to the U.S.
let him
Census
finish his
Bureau,
point. Let him finish his point, please.
24% of the racialized black community is in poverty. 28% of the Hispanic population is in poverty. Now, why are they not overrepresented in incarceration rates? That's a question that we should ask. But what I can say is that personally, I do believe that there is some degree of racism within the institution of the prison system. Absolutely, I do. Right, but just solely going based off of wealth income or wealth or income, I think is kind of creating a red herring and moving us away from what we should be looking at. And on top of that, the wealth, this generational wealth that everybody talks about, they talk about it monetarily. What they don't talk about is the passing down of information like investments. How do you do investments? How do you?
That's what I mean. That's what I was meaning.
Right. So, okay. There's multiple different aspects of what generational wealth could be, and sometimes it's not financial.
That's the point I was making. That's the point I was making. That's the exact point I was making. Exactly what I said.
What is the percentage of daddy can bail me out of jail for black kids versus white kids versus Hispanic kids? You are much more likely to not be bailed out if you're ADOS. That's just an anecdotal thing.
But we're missing something here. One thing we're missing is that why is the justice system designed so much in a way that it's basically run by money? That if you don't have money, you can't have good
Oh,
representation.
that's a whole different
That's a whole other show, dude.
But to me, that's the
we do,
problem.
no, I you know what? I will leave it there. Um
Because the truth is, even if African Americans become wealthy today and they're topping the
we
socioeconomic
didn't start
scale,
out equally is
we're
the
still,
point, Charles.
let me finish my point, Stanley. There's still going to be poor people in society. Are we just going to leave them at the mercy of the justice system that will cannibalize on them when they don't have money?
That is such a complicated question.
Question. Hey, can I jump in real quick? I want to read a question from Wolf. Wolf asked me if I could read his comment. He said an example would be a Phoenix Shakur. No lawyer would help her, so she had to defend herself and other members of the Black Panthers. That's racism. That's the point. He wanted me to read. He wants us to comment on that. He said saying that okay, he's trying to say that might be systematic racism because if it's a controversial black thing, can blacks get lawyers for controversial things the way maybe some whites get lawyers for controversial things? Is that example of systematic racism because of white social capital and versus the black lack of social capital in America made on white social capital? He wants us to comment on that.
There wasn't any racialized black lawyer that would take her
Patricia
on.
Patricia Hearst. Do you remember that? Steve, you're old enough to remember. Patty Hearst. She got off like a MF.
Yeah.
I mean, she went into like Stockholm syndrome was kind of like ridiculous.
Yeah.
This young woman, and I'm not discounting her experience, but um she got off like, oh my goodness, I was a kid and I was like, what?
Yeah. But was that because she was white or because she had money?
Both. She was a double winner. Name me a comparable case. Does not matter. Just name, rich matters
I mean,
since
you said O.J. Simpson.
1787, of course. She was lucky for a white woman.
Well, you said O.J.
You don't
Simpson.
agree?
Well, you said O.J. Simpson. He had tons of money and he was racialized as black. He still got
And
off.
where is he now? He spent some
Well,
time in jail, of course.
yeah, because he tried to rob people.
Well, right, but
But he
my
got off a
whole
murder.
argument, really the crux of my argument is that black people, ADOS, can be close to equal if they have the means for a superb defense.
Possible.
Hello, yeah. I have another
The,
question from Wolf. Hey, can I put it?
the systemic part is there aren't many OJ Simpsons in the ADOS community.
Okay, hey,
My
let me add something
part
from Wolf.
is
You
okay.
mind if I add a question from Wolf? I just want to answer because Wolf asked me to forward his questions for him. Okay, he said my question to Steve is why does she need to have a black lawyer? Where was the white one? So he's talking about the cases of racialized black people doing having controversial cases. Why would it need a black lawyer? Why wouldn't a white lawyer give it to him? I think he's alluding to the fact about whites in America might not want to represent controversial black things because of black history and black culture and the culture capital whites versus blacks and the respectability. I don't know all the elements he wants to add to it, but I'm trying to forward the questions as best I can understand it.
Yeah, the point is that if a racialized white attorney and a racialized black attorney don't take the case, then you probably have a really shitty case. It has nothing to do with the race.
So do black?
But let me ask you this. Let me add one more. Wait, Stanley. Wait. Let me follow up. Let me follow up real quick. Okay, but what if there's just way more white lawyers? What if there's way more white lawyers? For whatever reason, America's mostly white. Is way more to choose from. But because of the limitations of less black lawyers, you're for whatever reason you might have a disadvantage. I'm not saying that's exactly what he's trying to say. I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate and trying to get his question out all the way.
That would presume that every single racialized white attorney is a racist. I don't believe that.
Well, you don't have to believe it, but many do.
Many do, but believing it doesn't make it true.
It does not make it untrue either.
Sure. But it's kind of like trying to prove the existence of
It's
God.
a
You know what I
toss
mean? It's like,
of the dice. And it's also instinct. See,
Yeah.
that's my point. We are guessing who's a racist and who is not. We are, this whole argument about racism, it's a toss of the dice. That's my point. We don't know. We can't
yeah.
prove either way. We can only measure by racialized behavior.
Well,
Ideas kill just like sticks and stones.
I fundamentally disagree with that for the simple fact that the problem that we're doing here, and this is going to be a consistent problem until we get out of this habit, is looking at results and implying a correlation
Results
or implying
matter,
causation. It's
Steve.
not. Well, sure they do, but they don't imply causation. There can be a correlation, sure.
Awesome. Please finish
See,
that point.
Steve, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Because I'm basically still trying to grapple with this intergeneration wealth fixer thing. Is why are we siloing the conversation of intergeneration wealth about an individual or a group of people's ability to, in context of crime? Is that the only avenue through which intergenerational wealth is could be of benefit? Is it?
Well,
Is it just?
I think if you're jailing all of your fathers, then it becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because that leaves mothers more poor, it leaves families more poor, it leaves everybody more poor, and the experiences that mothers and fathers should be getting out in the world as a team raising their children is not there. So there is a massive concern about the overrepresentation of racialized black men in U.S. prisons, absolutely, and that will lead, in my opinion, to a generational wealth gap due to that to not being able to pass on generational knowledge.
Okay,
absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that.
Charles, if you're there again, I just could you please allow me to share my screen? I want to address something Steve has just
Sure, go
mentioned and
ahead.
the guys were talking about. What I wanted to show here goes directly into the discussion of intergenerational wealth. I think that was the term that was used. And what I am trying to show all of you now, if it pops up, can you see it as of yet? What I'm about to show you. No. Has it been shared? Okay,
there
it's
we
been
go.
shared now. Right. Now, what I'm showing you here is in America, this wasn't my plan because my plan was to concentrate on the UK, and I'll show you some data later. In the United States of America, in the state of Illinois, there's a town called Evanston. Now, Evanston is going through the process of trying to set up reparations within Evanston. And the reparations is based on housing. Okay. Now, why is that? So this is the government, the city of Evanston's website. We go here, the Evanston reparations FAQ. Why is the city of Evanston implementing local reparations? After the passage of Resolution 58R-19, commitment to end structural racism and achieve racial equity. In the summer of 2019, the Evanston City Council took action to address the historical wealth and opportunity gaps that African American Black residents of Evanston experienced. Alderman Robin Rue Simmons sought a solutions-only process with the support of the city's Equity and Empowerment Commission to identify actions that the city could take to implement a meaningful repair and reparations policy. The first initiative identified was a housing program. And this was done to address what you guys were talking about, intergenerational wealth. And they believe one of the ways they can do it is by basically focusing on housing. Because they claim here, the next question is, why is the city's first reparations program focused on housing. In July 2019, the Equity and Empowerment Commission held community meetings to solicit feedback from community members on what reparations would look like for the city of Evanston. Affordable housing and economic development were the top priorities. I repeat, affordable housing and economic development were the top priorities identified during those meetings. The report was submitted to the City Council for consideration.
The need to make reparations?
Who?
Stanley,
Well,
could you let him finish his point, please?
Thanks. Thank you very much, Charles. So that's the process that they're going through, because they've been having meetings with the Black Americans in that town, and they decided with the council that's what they wanted to do in regards to dealing with a generational gap there. Now, if you have a problem with them, that's your business. You're an American. You can take it up with those Black Americans. I'm not here to defend them. I'm just here to point out that in America, there are a group of people who are trying to address this intergenerational wealth gap.
God, dude, why does Evanston need to do reparations? That's my point.
Like I said, I don't know. You can take it up with them.
Well, that's my point also. You don't know.
But Stanley, that
they're
question,
not doing it out of the goodness of their whiteness.
So
what
are they doing it for?
They're doing it, correct?
What are they doing it for then?
Well, look up the history, sir.
So what is the
Well,
point?
it's obvious.
Every
It's obvious.
action has a reason behind it. There
Why don't
is
you tell us what you're actually trying to make? What is the point you're trying to make?
Why are they doing it? Have you researched that?
As I read there,
you're reading the results.
I read it to
You're
you.
not reading the
I'm
disease.
You asked me a question. I'm
and
reading
my
it.
next question is, why do you think they're doing that?
As I said earlier, they're trying to address historical wealth and opportunity gaps within the Black Americans in that town.
Do you
That's
know
what
the
they said.
history?
That is the answer to your question.
Do you know the history is my question.
Yes, I know the history about the race riots and the
please
towns that were
explain it
destroyed.
to us, Professor.
Stanley.
Yeah, Stanley, I think you're missing.
Sexually unhelpful.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, man. Larry, I mean,
questions.
Stanley, don't do that.
Sorry,
Don't do that, please.
Larry, thank you very much for, sharing this. I found it very insightful.
Thanks. I don't know. For some reason, Black Americans get upset when they find
How
other
is
Black
it
Americans doing something.
insightful if you are quoting articles but don't know what's behind the articles?
Actually, I'm not quoting an article.
How are you so sure he doesn't know the history?
And
so
that is
of all the people,
my
of all the
problem.
people here, you think
You
people
don't know the
about
history, but you're presenting. Oh, Charles, you are presenting antidotes, but you don't know the disease.
Stanley, if you know the disease, just offer an explanation why.
He does.
If there's a piece of information
No,
that you
Ogie,
feel you can share.
You are not the doctor here.
Oh my days.
Dude, I want to hear solutions with why there was a problem in the first place. You do not present this sort of thing.
So the why is important now?
Exactly.
The why wasn't important earlier.
When was it not important?
He asked the question.
When was the why not important?
He thought he had a.
How do you understand a problem if
So
you
when-
don't know the cause?
So I'm just going to continue talking because he seems to be having some kind of a hissy fit. Now, in the things that he's trying to insinuate, which he's not very good at, he's talking about things like what happened in Oscarville, Georgia, where the Black Americans were killed and pushed out of the town, and then the town was buried.
Stanley, let the people talk, Stanley. Let the people talk, Stanley, please.
They're talking about
what happened in
in my home state
Alabama.
that they don't understand.
He's talking about.
But Stanley, that's fine. That's fine. Let him present the case, and then you explain later. Let him present it, and then you give a rebuttal.
there's no rebuttal or nothing to present. Basically, he seems to be upset that I've mentioned a group of Black Americans who are trying to address historical wealth gap through reparations within the town of Evanston, Illinois, behaving like crabs in a bucket. I don't know.
Because as a matter of fact, I had an uncle who lived in Evanston. My uncle lived in Evanston. My uncle, my uncle used to live in Evanston. Yeah, I know about Evanston, but I didn't know about his program. But yeah, but he was just trying to say. I mean, he wasn't addressing it correctly. But he was just trying to say, okay, why are we even having this conversation about reparations? He doesn't want you to answer why is that? Because there has to have been, especially with the verified answers list and all this other stuff. What this is evidence. The reason why they're addressing this issue because it had to have been the issue of systematic racism. That's all he wanted to say. I know he had to be all. I don't know why he had to be all difficult to say that simple thing. But
nobody's disputing that. Nobody's disputing that there's been historical oppression or even a need for some sort of reparation or not, all that. And even people that are disputing it, what is their position? They they don't have the autonomy of deciding what will happen or will not happen. So if someone is making their point, you should be gracious to their point. Let them finish their point instead of getting angry.
Well, the primary
you're right.
I just find him incredibly disruptive. At the start, when I was talking about what was happening in the United Kingdom, he tried to find a way to bring the US and complain that why am I comparing it to the US? And I wasn't talking about the US. I was talking about what was happening to Black people, Black women in British prisons. So I don't know what his mental malfunction is, but he's getting really irritating.
But the big thing for me was like I was watching, I was trying to understand why in Ukraine that they were being racist towards the individuals in the video, and then I was told that why does why matter, and now all of a sudden why does matter. So I'm very confused.
Yeah, no,
like to fix the problem, we have to understand the why.
Yep,
so that's where my confusion comes from.
Yep, I remember that when he did that, when he was asking you that. This part was just to address what you were talking about racial, because you guys were talking about the racial wealth gap. And I was saying that there were some people in America who decided to do something about it. Now, for some reason, he wanted some long history lesson where you talk about what happened in these various towns I've got here where Black Americans were suppressed and they were kicked out of the towns and their wealth was taken from them, their property, their land. But that's a completely different subject matter, which we're not actually talking about. So I don't know. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is much more important, is in regards to this article that I've got here, which says Black and minority offenders far more likely than others to be jailed for drug offenses. And this is interesting. This is in the UK. It says stark disparity in courtroom outcomes is exposed by body that advises judges in England and Wales. Now, according to them, it says that Black and minority ethnic offenders are far more likely to be sent to prison for drug offenses than other defendants, according to groundbreaking research commissioned by the Sentencing Council. The stark disparity in courtroom outcomes is exposed by the official body that advises judges as it prepares to update guidelines for dealing with drug offenders in England and Wales. The investigation reinforces concerns raised by the review conducted by the Labour Member of Parliament, David Lammy, on behalf of the Ministry of Justice in 2017, that found that Black and ethnic minorities individuals face bias in court. So I'm curious, Steve, would something like this be helpful to you in trying to understand if within the courtroom, the arrest and the sentencing, there is a bias? If these guys are going through this process, like the sentencing, they said the Sentencing Council, they too have seen that there is a disparity. And there's a report which was commissioned by the Ministry of Justice in the UK, and they did come to the conclusion that Black and minority individuals face bias in court. Would that be enough, or do you think there'd have to be something more to confirm for you?
Well, it's not necessarily about confirming. It's more or less about being thorough. And the reason why I say that is if the demographics show that those individuals are among the most pervasive in the poverty level of class, right? Well, I know people who live in poverty and they will do illegal stuff so that they can feed their family. You know what I mean? So it doesn't surprise me that the larger majority of those in poverty commit more crime. It's because they have to. They have to be able to feed their families. You know, they want to be able to afford a TV, whatever the reason is. I mean, obviously that doesn't forgo the conversation that we have to, you know, have about, well, it's a crime, don't commit it. But then you look at, you know, when you're faced with your children not eating versus committing a crime, let's say selling drugs, which I firmly believe should be decriminalized anyways. But let's say that, you know, that's the option you've got the most readily available option to feed your family is to deal drugs. You're going to deal drugs, right? And then the judicial system is set up so much so that their responsibility is to prosecute those who get caught selling drugs, right? So it's this kind of vicious cycle in and out. But it rarely, as far as I'm concerned, has anything to do with race beyond the fact that those racialized groups are a larger majority of the poverty level. Now, the question that we should be asking is, why are they a larger part of the poverty level?
Well, no, maybe that's different in America, because I'm talking in UK, and the population of Black people in the UK is a lot smaller.
Oh,
so
yeah, I'm not making an assumption about America. I'm just making a generalized assumption. Is if your poverty class, right, is consisting of mostly of minorities, well, we need to ask, why is the poverty level or poverty class so populated with minorities? That's the question that should be asked, not why are they being criminalized at higher rates? Because the problem is poverty. It's not anything else. It's poverty. You get what I'm saying? Like, if we can solve the poverty issue, we'll solve the crime issue.
But that was a guess. You guessed there that the people who were being arrested, say for this, were all from like the underclass or the working class. That's an assumption you've jumped to. The reason I say so here is because when it talks of the odds of a Black offender receiving an immediate custodial sentence were found to be 1.4 times the odds for a comparable white offender. So you've got two people who you could say are coming from the underclass or the working class. One is Black, one is white. But for some reason, the Black offender is found to be.
Are these first-time offenders, or are they multiple offenders?
These are first-time offenders.
So first-time offenders, if they're racialized as Black, get more time than someone who's a first-time offender of someone who's racialized as white.
Yep, that's the claim that they're making here. This is
okay. If that's the claim they're making, I believe that there should be there's reason to investigate as to why that's occurring. Absolutely, and I think that's the responsibility of a decent society to do that.
Yeah, I would say so. But that's the kind of stuff that I've been looking at. This report that they were trying to which they've actually implemented, which the Sentencing Council has agreed to.
Yeah.
So
my issue is making complicated situations look simple. You know what I mean? Or finding simple solutions to complex problems irritate the absolute bejesus out of me.
So how would you go about it? Because if we were to address the way you're looking at it from the poverty level, the class level, so that would be a case of reducing the amount of people who are working class, whether they're Black,
right?
And then by reducing it, you're saying theoretically we would see less of those Black people being arrested, being harassed by police, ending up in the court system because they wouldn't be committing crime.
Yeah, access to education and home ownership, property ownership, those two things would do a massive amount to curbing the problem. I use myself as an example because, I mean, I grew up poor. My family was poor. There was no generational wealth there. I've never received money from my family. I was a high school flunky, finally got my act together and stayed consistent with my career as a mechanic for 25 years. And the day that I bought my house, and about 3 years later, my wealth had gone up by almost $500,000.
That's a very good, interesting story. If I was to say to you, the whole process of getting that loan, that mortgage, if I was to say to you that there are people giving out that mortgage or loan who would be reluctant to give it to someone who didn't have your skin color. So if a Black person came in asking for that same mortgage, that person might say, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to give you because of your skin color. But they don't say it. But then the white person comes in who's also working class, and then they would get it, or they would get the loan. Do you think it would be possible that such a thing could be implemented within, say, the financial institution? They wouldn't necessarily write it down on paper.
Right. So yeah, we had our own issue with that here in the U.S. It was HUD housing discrimination and redlining. Yeah.
Yeah. Redlining.
No, if you know, we have laws on the books now that say we can't do that. We're not supposed to do that. It's a federal crime, right? If you've got a racialized black individual coming into your bank and you've got a racialized white individual coming into your bank, and both of them meet the same exact criteria across the board, right? There's no difference between these two individuals fundamentally as far as what they look like on paper. And if you are discriminating against the person of color versus the person, you know, the racialized white person, yeah, you've got a serious issue. Absolutely, you've got a serious freaking issue. But then, you know, I can't help but, you know, hear Dr. Mason in the back of my head being like, well, yeah, the problem is we need to do away with race and all criteria that race brings with it.
True. I'm going to play something for you now. I don't know how long or how I'll be able to get away with it. I'll give some commentary. It's quite short. It's basically the thing which inspired me to start looking into this stuff, which Charles saw some of the data, and it's a scene from a TV show. This woman here is a black lawyer, a prosecutor, assistant district attorney. She's coming to courtroom, and basically what will happen is you will see people who are going to be judged for the crimes. You can see there are a mixture of people there, and this guy there is the defense.
I've got a B&E on Reginald Dukes, 16. He's a sophomore at the alternative school. No prior felonies or misdemeanors. I'd like the state to go with us on 2 years probation. Right.
Says no prior felonies or misdemeanors. So I guess he's hoping for some form of leniency because it's first-time offense. Now, the reason I mentioned that, because when we look at that's just a scene from a TV show. But when we look at something like that, can we automatically say, well, that was racist? The judge was being racist. Maybe he had good reasons to do what he did. Or maybe he was being racist. That scene was the thing which inspired me to go and get all that information I was looking at. And then Charles saw it, and then Charles suggested, okay, come up and discuss it with the guys here. Because when you see something like that, and the documentaries I've seen where it's actually happened in the UK and abroad, how can you pinpoint that is racism? I mean, my gut feeling would say that he's being racially biased, the judge. But then someone could argue, well, how do you know? You don't know. There is no evidence to say he's being racially biased.
But then she was racially biased just because she saw him and changed her position.
Well, that could be the thing, but she made the legal argument that he was a first-time offender and it was a misdemeanor. That was the argument she was making because he was a first-timer. So she was legally making that argument, which made sense legally because he was a first-timer. So, but the judge said no, he had to be taught a lesson, 90 days prison. So he's now got a criminal record and stuff. So I don't know. Part of me, my gut feeling when I saw that, and the documentaries I've seen which had that type of scenario, would be like, that's racism there. That's an example of systemic racism. And this might go back to that earlier thing I discussed with you guys about the judges in the UK, the 8 judges in the UK who were taking the court system to the parliament for an inquiry because they felt there was prejudice. It's just a gut feeling. I can't actually say that, yes, I know for a fact that that type of judge or that type of ruling from a judge was based on racism. And if you have 20 judges who think like that, well, that's systemic racism. It becomes difficult. How does one prove it? You then have to look to the data, the stats, because you can't go into the person's mind. You can't go into the judge's mind. He's not going to stand in front of a camera and say, yes, I did it because I'm racist. So I don't know.
You know. Larry, can I ask a quick question on that too?
Sure.
So say hypothetically, right? We could throw race out of the window. Okay. Say we had no conception of race. Could there, for instance, be other motives or rational why the and right now I'm actually thinking financial. Like could there be other motives or rational why the judge, for instance, would choose to go down that harsher route?
Well, no, because when mentioned legally, it's a first time offense. I mean, don't get me wrong, the guy did commit a crime. You know, it was I think it was burglary or something, or breaking in somewhere. But it was a first time offense, and apparently legally in the UK as well as outside of the UK, there is leniency legally, which is shown if it's a first time offense, theoretically, regardless of your race or your class. But the judge decided not to do that. So it'd be interesting. Why did the judge decide not to do that? The judge said he wanted to teach him a lesson. He felt that the prosecutor was being too lenient. So I don't know. I felt he was being too lenient. So I don't know. It's just a gut feeling, you know. I just think it's racism.
Oh, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, Cody.
All right then. I can speak a bit to that. I think, see, when you're talking about the criminal justice system and mistreatment for African Americans, we need to understand that one of the main racist stereotypes about African Americans are based on ableism and saneism, and the belief that people of African descent were less intelligent than others, and also that they weren't entirely sane by most standards, being prone to violence, etc. So when taking those stereotypes in mind, the punitive measures against African Americans makes more sense when you believe that certain people cannot be reasoned with and that they are naturally more violent, then certain forms of changing their behavior aren't possible, and thus the use of violence and force against them seems to be more rational if you hold those prejudices. So I think that we need to understand that these prejudices may often be what affects disproportionate treatments and sentences.
You know, in that scene that we just watched, I'd have to watch it again, but if I remember, there was a conversation about restitution, which is a monetary repayment of damages, and the first thing that she suggested was 30 days plus restitution, and then went back as soon as she saw who it was, changed that to, I think it was something else. But then the judge ordered 90 days and then probation with no restitution. So I guess one of the arguments you could make is that the judge is doing him a favor by not making him pay more money in the long run, therefore inherently causing a deeper sense of poverty and just getting the time over with. Yeah, but I don't like that argument. I don't like that argument. But
I understand what you're saying. It's a good argument, but
yeah, the reason why I bring that up is that we could look at this because there was fundamentally there was three different punishments available as an option, and all three of them were thrown out there. And unfortunately, the one that the judge chose is his own. But there's so much that we're missing in that. Like, we could probably do a whole 2-hour show just on that scene alone, because there's so much in there. You know, there's socioeconomic argument there that they made. Parents can't afford to miss work. You know, this kid's, he's young. He doesn't even have a career yet. He has no money in savings. You know what I mean? It might be easier for him to spend the time in jail than to try and pay restitution if he doesn't have a job when he gets, you get what I'm saying? There's so much complexity and nuance.
I understand what you're saying, but the problem is once he's in jail, he's criminalized. He's now a felon.
Right.
So he will lose certain constitutional and civil rights, I guess, when he comes out. So if he wanted to go
not if it's a misdemeanor. Not if it's a misdemeanor. If it's a felony, yeah.
Oh, even misdemeanors do carry, depending on the state. Because I was watching a documentary about a guy called Khalif Browder in New York State, and they were giving people misdemeanors, and they would plead guilty because they had a system in New York where, as you mentioned, because of their socio-economic background, they couldn't pay the bail. So because they couldn't pay bail, they would have to go to jail till their court case came out, and they would dump them in Rikers Island. you know.
Right.
And
then they had to change the law to not allow minors to go into Rikers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was because of the Khalif Browder case. So then the problem is once they were in there, they would plead guilty because nobody wants to spend time in prison. So they would say, okay, I'll take the plea. They would plead to the misdemeanor, and that would still remain. It wouldn't disappear. So if they went for a job, it would be seen. If they tried to apply for funding for, say, college, they would be turned down because they would do a background check and see, oh, you had this problem. So the idea of going into jail is just, apart from the physical violence you could experience when you come out, and you've pled guilty to a misdemeanor or something. That's it. Your career is over. You're not going to get a job. Who's going to give you a job every time you apply for work? It's like the things that people take for granted, they're gone.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you on that. You're not going to find an argument from me on that at all. Like, I'm with you on it.
But I still agree. And even though in my gut, when I see that, I think he's being prejudiced, the judge, there is no concrete evidence to state that he is being prejudiced. There is no concrete evidence. So you then have to go with the data and then come to a conclusion with the data. But then people can challenge your interpretation of that data and say, no, well, you're not looking at it right, or you're looking at it incorrectly. So I understand, but
well, there was no shortages of judges in the South that actively sentenced racialized Black folk to more jail time consistently. I mean, that was a very, very common thing in the South.
Right. Jim politics is that they were laws written to be racially neutral, but were enforced in ways to reinforce racial segregation.
Yeah, that's a good point, Cody. That's a good point.
Yep,
that's a good point. So at this point, given obviously the obvious issue with the perniciousness and insidiousness of what we would term systemic racism, do we still see a benefit of even using that word to describe what I would term incorporeal aspects of discrimination that we see? Is it because when we say systemic racism, obviously we're sorry, am I hearing an echo?
A little bit.
Oh,
yes,
sorry.
There is an echo. I don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah, sorry, Larry, and it's basically speaking to, what you've highlighted as a conundrum in terms of provability, absent of intent, like absence of knowing intent. So would you say even describing something as systemic racism now is redundant?
No, I would say systemic racism would still exist. It's just that its implementation is a lot more subtle than it was, because some people assume, and I usually get into these discussions with people who choose not to believe in systemic racism, and I'll ask them, whether it's an American or a British person, I'll say, do you know of any time where you can blatantly say systemic racism existed? And when I've spoken to Americans, they will talk to the Jim Crow South, the 60s. Of course, you can talk about apartheid South Africa. So to them, their idea of systemic racism is something which is really obvious, where you have a sign saying whites only, blacks only, or there's
it's
a law.
real.
It's real.
It's written down on paper. So the idea of it being insidious and much more subtle and clandestine, they're like, well, that's not systemic racism, which is why most of the time there's a lot of cross talking. People end up talking past each other about the systemic racism. I believe that it exists, but it has changed. It's changed in its format, the way it operates, but it's still there. It's a bit like slavery. If we look at and Steve and all the other Americans here, Ogie, you can correct me, but 1865 officially slavery was abolished because the South surrendered, right? But the 13th Amendment still says that slavery can be used as a criminal punishment.
Yeah.
And then in fact, what happened, you had things like the Black Codes, convict leasing, where a lot of Black Americans were taken in. And in fact, fast forward to 2022, you'll get Black Americans making claims that there's mass incarceration of their people who end up in prisons and they're used like slaves. So it still exists. Slavery still exists. It's just changed its form.
Well, we also had peonage, sharecropping, Jim Crow, redlining. We had multiple systems in place to do the same thing that slavery was doing.
Yes, but
Exactly.
the thing about them is that most of them were obvious. They were written down on paper. Like we all know about redlining now, but when they were doing it in the 30s and 40s, those town planners, they kept that document secret amongst themselves. Somehow, somewhere, it got leaked out. So
well, this was happening up into the 80s,
yeah,
and arguably into the 90s. Like this is fairly recent, which is it's an abomination. Is on it's a scar on our nation. It really is.
but that
It
will
makes me
always be the
sick to think
problem.
about it.
Yeah, and redlining wasn't even specifically racialized in those back rooms either. They were just listed as people who were seen as less worthy investments for any abstract reason. And it could have been also for, see, not only are they racialized, but if they were immigrant populations or be deemed to be populations of disabled people as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, is that during during redlining, and to finish that line up is that it wasn't just racialized black folk either. It was racialized white folk. It was racialized Hispanic. It was a classist endeavor with racist undertones or even overtones, if you want to put it that way. So there was just monumental problems throughout that entire concept. And ableism was definitely, I mean, it's not until recently that we've really kind of gotten a hold on what we perceive to be ableism and ableist discrimination.
Sorry, I was reading something which Charles, are you there? I wanted to share one last thing for you guys. It still ties in with the judge,
Right.
and in regards to sentencing. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this, and you guys can tell me what you think on this newspaper article. This is based in the United Kingdom, and can you see the article as of yet? Has it popped up in
No,
front
not
of you
yet.
guys? Not yet. Just give it some time.
Now we can.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay. This is from an article which is over 5 months old. Headline: UK judge orders right-wing extremist to read classical literature or face prison. Penn John, former Leicester student who downloaded white supremacist documents, given suspended jail sentence. Let's read some more.
Interesting.
Ben John Ben John will have to return to court every 4 months to be tested on his reading of Dickens, Austen, Shakespeare, and Hardy. And says, a former student who downloaded almost 70,000 white supremacist documents and bomb-making instructions has avoided a prison sentence by the skin of his teeth after being told to read classical literature by Dickens, Austen, Shakespeare, and Hardy. Ben John, 21, from Lincoln, a former student at De Montfort University in Leicester, has to return to court every 4 months to be tested on his reading. Judge Timothy Spencer QC said he also sentenced him to a suspended 2 years imprisonment plus a further 2 years on license. John was identified as a terror risk days after his 18th birthday and was referred to the PREVENT program, but continued to download repellent right-wing documents. The Leicester Mercury, which is a newspaper, reported. He also wrote a letter raging against gay people, immigrants, and liberals. On 11th of August, he was convicted by a jury of possessing information likely to be useful for preparing an act of terror, which carries a maximum jail sentence of 15 years. Sentencing him at Leicester Crown Court, the judge concluded his crime was likely to be an act of teenage folly and an isolated incident. So I don't know.
That judge is incredibly incompetent.
I guess the logic of reading classical literature, he'll become less bigoted.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Why not have him read literature that's actually applicable?
Yeah, it seems to also be trying to reinforce some ideas of British nationalism by having him only read, historically British literature.
Right, that too. Holy shit, I didn't even realize that. Leave it to, I love how Cody thinks because they're gonna catch on to that shit.
Yeah, so
Love
they're
it.
afraid of shooting themselves in the foot and that kind of sentencing, not understanding the implications. So yeah, that doesn't make too much sense.
Can I just say this this is also another really good example of using the judicial system as a hammer instead of using it as a more opportune tool. Where what's going on with this kid? Like, why is he this angry? Like, what broke this man down, this child down to the point where he literally hates everything that is not him? You know, that's where our judicial systems, both what I can tell, British and American, are both failing miserably. Is we're using the judicial system as a blanketed hammer just to beat the death out of everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree. I shouldn't laugh, but that's it. I just felt I should show that it was like unfair bias in sentencing. Could it have been done because of his race? Maybe the white judge was wanting to help a young white boy out. I don't know. What
I think
I
it
do
looks
know is
like
that
that
the
attempt at
sentence.
re-educating an extremist who hadn't technically done anything wrong yet.
Yeah. I mean, if he had done something wrong, then we would hopefully be having a very different conversation right now.
Yeah, I did want to use this to bring things back, though. I did want to ask Charles, so was the focus of this conversation meant to be about anti-Black racism or systemic racism specifically?
It was meant to be anti-Black racism, and it wasn't specific to any country. It was supposed to be anywhere. You know, how does racism play out against Black people anywhere in the world? So
Okay, then yeah. So I did want to. Oh, sorry.
So that was why it sort of upset me when Stanley was making it about the US. And I said something in the chat box that the US is not the center of the universe. And you have to make allowance that there are other experiences in other parts of the world that are just as valid. So when someone is making a point, even if he's making a point about another country, you can't just say, but the UK is not the US. Well, yeah, UK is not the US, and the US is not the center of the world.
Yeah, so I did want to obviously try to address, again, using the term racialization. I think this is important because to drive home the point that not everybody holds the same definition of race or racism, and different groups of people are racialized in different ways in different contexts. So I think that we want to address what anti-Black racism is. We need to address how Blackness is defined, and then I think it's important to address how many racialized Black people have been scapegoated for societal ills throughout history. So I think when we're trying to form a definition of anti-Black racism, we need to address all the stigmas that are projected onto people who are racialized as Black. And that goes back to my point earlier when I talked about how people who were racialized as Black were assumed to be less intelligent, less rational, and naturally prone to behaviors that were stigmatized in society. Again, scapegoating.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, Cody, because that's I kept getting distracted, but I did want to bring that up. So I'm glad that you did.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. That is a very valid point.
Yeah, thank you. I think you getting into further detail about like how different groups of people who are racialized as Black are still racialized in different ways, such as the different stereotypes projected on people who are like Nigerian immigrants or descendants of slaves in the United States or Afro-Caribbean people. They're all racialized as Black, but still have different stereotypes projected on them because of other nuances of their background.
Yeah.
There are even anti-Black racist beliefs internalized by people who are racialized and self-identified as Black, and those come with their own issues.
Yeah. And then this is this is a situation where I actually really do appreciate the intellect of intersectionalism, just not as it was written. The base of what Kimberly Crenshaw had as an idea for intersectionality was incredibly brilliant, and it should have been obvious to everybody, but I think it kind of got bastardized a little bit too far, to be honest. But it does have applicability. You know, it's like, okay, well, you know, this intersection between being racialized as Black and female and gay, has a much broader impact on your life than if you were, racialized, white, straight, and whatever. Like obviously life is going to be different for you than it is for me, especially if we're living in a very what you would consider a heteronormative environment. It's going to be massively different.
Agreed. I even just recently finished W.B. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk. And I feel he touched on that same concept with double consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one book I should read.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I even tried to find parallels of double consciousness with other concepts, and I found a sociologist a few years after Du Bois published the book came up with the concept of looking glass self and looking glass identity, which is the idea of perceiving yourself through how you assume other people perceive you, and thus have the identities that are projected upon you that don't reflect the identity you hold for yourself. And I think I think that explains a lot of the issues that people who are the victims of racism and other forms of prejudice suffer, because prejudice, prejudging people, making assumptions about people, there's often a lot of dysphoria when people realize that people make assumptions about them that don't reflect their own personal identity and have things.
Yeah, there was also a writer and philosopher who came up with the idea of man not, which was very similar to that dual consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois, which, by the way, he pronounced it W.E.B. Du Bois because he detested the French, the French version of his name. But Du Bois he was an interesting character. But yeah, he did argue for that double consciousness, or what today we would consider code switching. You know what I mean? So very interesting guy.
Yeah, I remember him describing it as the two-ness of being both African and American, and suffering from having people making assumptions about you that don't reflect yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that kind of goes into this conversation, doesn't it?
Yep, that's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, about anti-Black racism, about the disparity between the ways that many racialized Black people define Blackness themselves and how many people who hold anti-Black racism define Blackness. There's a disparity between the definitions of Black between those with pro-Black and anti-Black ideas.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Tommy Curry's man not. Tommy Curry's man not is what Dr. Mason said.
So I think that's what makes things really difficult to talk about this, because we're dealing with that racial synecdoche of people applying different definitions to the same word, and then having those definitions have wide-ranging applications that not everyone grasps.
Okay, so let me come in here. The way I tend to see these things, the way I usually work with these things is to simplify it as simple as possible. You understand? And the way I conceptualize of anti-Black racism here is simply discrimination where there is obviously no other factor influencing that discrimination based on how someone looks, based on someone being mostly of an African descent or having a darker shade of skin. So that is the sense I'm looking at it in that very simplistic sense of the definition of the word. There are Black people all over the world. There are Black people in Europe. There are Black people in Americas. There are Black people in Australia. So I wanted to get the experiences of people of real experiences of racism. I didn't want sort of a generalized, this. I wanted very specific, because if there is a problem, I think it should be addressed. But I also don't think that problems should be manufactured. You understand? So why I'm not going to say racism is an all-consuming problem. I'm still going to, when I see it, I'm still going to say, man, this is racism, and we have to kill it. I have to be that objective. But there's one point I wanted us to talk about before we end the stream, which is something Stanley brought up in the Discord a while ago. It was about the Roland Fryers study. Conservatives like to use that data a lot to show that the cops are not disproportionately killing Black people. But another thing the study also revealed was that the cops were disproportionately harassing or targeting black people more than white people in terms of um, um, every other thing up until the point where they shoot them. That is a massive problem. That is a big problem. You understand? And I don't see why that data is just simply glossed over and people jump to the well. They're not killing black people any more than they're killing white people. But if they're harassing black people any more than they're harassing white people, that's a big problem and that's a big systemic issue. So, what do you guys think?
I think that's glossed over because a lot of conservatives, in my mind, again, the pro-life thing, they value life and not quality of life. So as long as people are living, they don't really care how bad their lives are.
Oh, Wolf, please come back again. I just missed that you're here. So Wolf is going to come back shortly, and once he comes, I'll let him speak. But Steve, go before he comes. Yes.
Well, I guess I don't understand the question.
Okay, Wolf is back. I would ask the question again. So Wolf, let's hear you.
Yeah. Yeah,
What's
I'm
up,
here.
Wolf?
I got like 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, jump right in.
My main question would be this. I was talking about the thing with the Phoenix Court earlier. She won her case, and the question I had to Steve was, the lawyers are supposed to know the cases better than the citizens. And my question is, why did the lawyers deny her access to a reputable lawyer if it's not some kind of systemic stuff involved there? Because she was defending the Black Panther Party, specifically Panther 21, who was not a violent part of the Black Panther organization. She didn't commit any crimes, yet if she had not got off, she would have done 350 years in prison. And Tupac, unfortunately, would have never been where he is today. Well, where he was. So what is your statement to that? Because I would make an argument that the lawyers knew she could win the case. They just didn't want to take it on because of the civil acts that she was tied to.
I think that's possible. I mean, was anybody actively keeping her from attaining an attorney or retaining an attorney?
She tried to get a couple, but she was in jail, and a lot of public defenders would not come to her aid because there was a lot of bad things surrounding the Black Panther Party at the time. Which
Well, they don't have an option to refuse their service if they're a public defender.
Yeah. And that's
they
what
can
I'm
in
talking
certain
about.
circumstances, but I mean,
Right.
I don't see how
Now, granted, this was
this one
back in
would
the
apply.
70s, I believe. So
Yeah.
I don't know if the laws were a little bit different, but that would be the main argument. But the other point I wanted to bring up was the thing I brought up in the chat about the Section 8 housing. They don't allow people to purchase homes in the projects the same way they do in poor white areas that I have noticed. Looking through the numbers, if they would expand Section 8 housing to rent to buy, I think that would help the Black community specifically, but that's not as big and common of a thing in the projects versus the trailer parks. And my question is, why is that not being implemented?
Houses are expensive.
Yes, but
You
the
have
rent to
to
own
have.
Section 8 is the government's.
No, continue.
I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead, man. You go ahead.
Yeah, basically, that's my point that I wanted to make is like houses are expensive 100%, but see, these Black poor areas, the property values have been driven into the ground due to the crime rates. So technically, you can make an argument these houses are cheaper, and if you give people a chance to buy their home with some kind of form of government assistance, you could argue that could be a form of reparations for the poor Black community, but that's not being implemented. And that
I would
is my
argue
main
it's just the
question.
right thing to do. I would argue
Yeah,
it's the right thing to do
of course. But
because it
you could
should be.
use
I
that as
mean,
an argument,
oh
100%.
yeah,
That could be a
absolutely.
form.
Yeah, absolutely, you could. And I think, whatever you call it, I am more for the support of a community that is wealthier overall. So the more wealth a neighborhood has, the better it
Yeah,
generally does. So
100%.
I'd be 100% on board with that. And I would, I mean, if I was in a position to, I'd even help up draw the work, draw up
Yeah,
the paperwork. But I'm not, unfortunately. I'm just a
yeah,
mechanic. But I think, I don't disagree with you. That's always been something that's been on my mind is how do we
100%.
increase wealth without trying to in place some underpinning racial construct behind it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Because see,
Kind of like what Larry's talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Finish up. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's exactly like what Larry is trying to point out here is like, this thing happened, but was racism a part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Remove race from the conversation entirely and say, are you poor? Do you have bad credit? Do you have a criminal background? If so, let's try and help you get a house. Let's help you get an education. Let's improve your lot in life. Let's help you build a future that you can then pass down on to the next generation. Sign me up. I'd be on that on like stink on shit, man. I'd be right there.
Okay, okay, go ahead. Finish your point.
I'm sorry, Charles. The last question I wanted to ask was this, and I'm asked this question to Melinda in the chat as well. When Larry was showing that video of that black boy, do you think he would have been seen in the same light if he had tattoos and he was talking a little bit hood, for example? Do you think he would have been seen in the same light? And do you think that black lawyer would have showed the same sympathy or no?
I don't think so.
But it's still his first offense, though. Let's not change that.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right.
My argument is, would he still be seen in the same light if he had tattoos? Not specifically gang tattoos, just tattoos in general. I would argue
we're getting more there into obviously different concepts of prejudice and internalized racism.
And that's my point, is that to some degree, we're using that because I don't know, Steve, you got tattoos. I don't know if a lawyer would see you in the same light as a kid that didn't have tattoos, but I would make a case that black kids with tattoos are not going to be seen in the same light as even that kid. But the middle class white kid who has no tattoos, I think will be seen a lot better than even the poor black kid with or without tattoos.
Yeah. I think you've got an argument there.
Yeah.
Again, I leave the drugs, I leave the gang stuff off because there's an exception for that. But yeah.
I think it's all about perception, and we human beings, we are creatures of habit, and somehow our brains short circuits certain things based on prejudice that we have there are certain things that we've just imbibed, whether or not we want to. So we associate certain behaviors with, either positive or negative. So if someone who has, for example, in my country, in Nigeria, if you're a young man and you have tattoos, just know that you're going to be harassed by the police, whether you're a criminal or not. But that itself is associated with criminal behavior. So if you're going about with tattoos, the police is going to harass you. You get. So imagine that situation being in front of a judge or being in the justice system. It doesn't matter whether you're a criminal, but just the perception of that alone has already taken some points away from you. You get. So human behavior is complex, and it really is complex. But
my question, Charles, to you would be a question. I don't know if you have gangs in Nigeria. I assume you do. Would the regular tattoos be seen the same way as, say, a gang tattoo of initiation?
Well, gang tattoo. I don't know if there's a distinction between gang tattoo and
of course, there's many of them, Charles.
Well,
I don't think Charles runs around in those circles, man.
Yeah,
Charles. For example, take tribal tattoos, like regular tribal tattoos, like you see Hawaiian people get.
Those are different. I mean, if they are tribal tattoos, people know that this is a cultural symbol, so it's different.
Okay. Yes, that was my question. Would they see that the same way as, say, a person with like a Playboy Gangsta Crip bunny tattooed on their neck, or a Rolling 60s with a Rolling 60 on their forearms? Would they be seen the same way?
Of course, they won't be seen the same way, because one is a cultural symbol which people understand, and the other is something else again. So
right.
My father said, never get a tattoo where a judge can see it. And I don't. I don't have any visible tattoos except for my ring finger. I got me and my wife's initials tattooed on our ring fingers.
Now,
that's the only visible tattoo.
I want to ask you a really complex question here, if I can. Let's
Sure.
say tomorrow you committed the most violent crime known to man, armed robbery, burglary. Do you think that if you have your tattoo showing, you'll get treated harsher, or do you think you would be treated better if your tattoos were covered?
Oh, most definitely, I'd be treated harsher.
Why is that? That's my question for everybody.
Because we still have this kind of cultural presumption that anybody with tattoos is immediately a criminal. I mean, Japan still, I mean, even to this day, if I was to go to Japan, I would have to cover my arms. I wouldn't be able to walk around shirtless.
Yeah.
Right. So we still have these cultural expectations that a tattoo means something derogatory because of you know, however long we've viewed it that way. I don't even know how long, but you know, even despite the fact that my like half of like this arm is all about family. It's got, you know, I've got a tattoo for my daughter on there, my grandmother. On my other arm, it's all car stuff. It's like none of this is related to criminality, but they're not going to inspect my arms. They're just going to see it. Huh?
Even your hair, Steve, with your hairstyle in my country, the police are going to be looking at you suspicious. And if you have dreads and all
I'm pretty
that,
sure I look suspicious wherever I go.
And that would be the point I would make, Charles, is that not a form of racism for the cops to look at him that way? Would they do it because he's white, or would they do it because of his hairstyle?
well, in my country, obviously, it's because of his hairstyle. I can't speak for any other place.
Well, I think the question really should be, how should we treat people like that? Right? We should treat them with all the dignity and humanity that they deserve, taking into account any possible various scenarios that brought them into a situation where they had to interact with law enforcement or a judge. Right. The reason why I love the theory of racelessness so much is it removes from us this conception and perception that race actually matters when we're dealing with issues of humanity and decency. Right. We should be looking at someone being like, okay, what was the crime? Excuse me. What was the crime they committed? Was it violent, nonviolent? You know, taking into consideration the facts of the case. And making an appropriate decision according to that, where, you know, and I just wrote an article about this, is like, and then we have on top of this, we have intraracial racism, you know, the race lining that I discussed in my article, right? Like the way that we love to divide ourselves it seems like it is innumerable, the ways that we want to divide ourselves. And we just keep creating new ways of doing this. And it's absolutely like it's an abominable behavior that us as humans surprisingly have not grown out of yet.
Yeah. And
so,
get to that more. Oh, sorry.
No. What were you saying?
Oh, getting that more about even what Charles says about people being complex and having different prejudices. I would wanted to bring up the concept of the generalized other, which I learned in anthropology, where people have different assumptions about people and what they assume generally from others. And the issue with racism and other forms of prejudices is that it leads you to generalize other people in different ways and make assumptions about them. And like with the example of tattoos, there is a cultural tradition of associating tattoos with the deviant behaviors. I'm not sure exactly why. I think I don't know why I was told not to get tattoos as a kid was because God made your body in a certain way, and why would you change it? So it's seen as a violation of Christian norms. But again, these issues of prejudices is that it creates false correlations between things. Again, assuming that those with tattoos are criminals, etc., forming illogical connections between the disparate traits. And that's the issue with racism as well, assuming that people with darker skin are somehow more criminal, etc.
And Charles, I told you I was going to mention it, and I got nothing but love for Steve, but Steve has changed my opinion a little bit on the left. But at least in America, I think one of the #1 pushers of systemic racism and this whole thing is Marxist white liberals. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. They're the #1 pusher, but the Republicans are not far behind them.
I'm going to agree with
Marxist
you
because Steve is a true liberal. Steve is a true liberal, not these tags that we throw around because of that Republican intervention. Marxist liberals are not the same as liberals.
That's the only thing D'Angelo gets right.
Do they actually this is a bit of a conundrum. How can you be a Marxist and a liberal at the same time?
Because
Philosophies
the
are
term was
different.
hijacked by Republicans, and I say Marxist liberal because they're identifying as liberals, but they're Marxist. Now, Steve is a true liberal. The reason I slapped Marxist in front of it is because they're skewing communism, Marxism ideologies, trying to hijack liberalism. And until I see liberals separating themselves like Steve, I'm going to continue to put that tag on it because that's what they're identifying as.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
the etymology of the word liberal is liberty.
Yeah. Like Steve gives me hope in the left. A lot of hope.
Steve is not. Steve is just is the lefty in name only. Steve,
and
Steve is,
And the reason I say
is
that
very
too,
much on the center, and maybe you have one foot on the center right and one foot in the middle, Steve, and the label lefty.
Steve is gonna end up going to the right. These lefts are gonna push him far enough.
Well, yeah, they'll push me far enough. I'm not going to go on my own. Definitely. I mean, like 10, 20 years ago, I would have been considered extremely left.
Yeah.
And now I'm pushed more by everybody else to the kind of more center right, center leftish area. But it's like, but my politics hasn't changed at all.
So the left left you. You didn't leave the left.
The left left me homeless.
I'd say the directional metaphors like right and left are kind of useless when talking about social
100%.
ideologies because it's way more complex than abstract binaries.
And it's a circle. It's not a flat line. It's not a linear line. It's a circle
100%.
encompassed with a large body of politic in the middle of it.
Yep.
It's
Like,
yeah.
It's like a marathon race in a circle, essentially. Like the Marxist liberals are out front, and the Republicans are right behind them, running behind them, just following them around the circle again and again and again. And it's not changing. But the Marxist is the big problem, at least in America.
So
yeah.
If Steve is a Marxist liberal, then what the
No,
Republicans
Steve is not
are
a Marxist liberal. Steve is not a Marxist liberal. He is a true
What are the
liberal.
Republicans? What are the Republicans? Are they
The Republicans
liberals?
are no,
they're
Republicans
conservatives.
they're conservatives, but the problem with Republicans is they think because they freed the slaves, all of a sudden that black people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It doesn't work that way, especially in the projects. They need opportunity and infrastructure and education in order to do that. You can't just tell them to get a fucking job when there's no jobs.
Yeah, they're just like, all right, you're good now. You're good, right? You're good. You can do all this. Cool. We're out.
They
See ya.
refuse to acknowledge the damage that Jim Crow and all that shit caused. They just pretend like that didn't. Oh, it just is what it is. No, it's not. Just is what it is.
Yeah, but they couldn't free anybody. The Republican Party today isn't the same as it was in 1860.
Oh, that's facts as well. That's why I say they're garbage too.
But in regards to what you mentioned about housing, just bringing it back to the UK, back in the 80s, the Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher, implemented a program where people who lived in council housing were given the opportunity to buy the council flats and council houses they lived in. And this was
the Iron Lady did that
back in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah. And a lot of people did purchase their flats and purchase the houses. The buy to whatever they called it scheme. So people who were in council houses no longer became renters or rentees. They now became property owners. The side effect to that was that I'd say more than 20 years later, what happened was that the councils then stopped building houses because the thing was they were letting all their property go. People were buying it who were living there, but they weren't building flats or houses to catch up with that. So what happened is you had a population explosion in Britain over a period of time, more migrants coming in, people, starting families, and people needing housing, needing help from councils. But they found that there was a shortage of housing. And this has plagued the British government for a number of decades, where whenever a prime minister or a political party comes into power, the housing issue always comes up. So they did do it, but the other thing was they didn't continue building more council houses at the same rate. So it left a situation where people were then left staying in bed and breakfasts or motels. So they would have to be pulled in to help with emergency housing and helping people out. And so that's what happened in the UK. regards to that.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So like to the point I was making, Cody, because I might have misconstrued it, is it's more Marxism than it is liberal. The reason I slapped that tag is because saying Marxist, saying liberal in a general, in my opinion, is offensive to people like Steve who are true liberals. It's the Marxism that's really the problem. The only reason I put the white liberal on it is because when you talk to a white Marxist liberal, they'll tell you everything about the black community, yet they've never been there. They'll tell you how dumb they are. They can't get an ID. They can't vote. They can't do this. They can't do that. But then you go to Harlem, the heart of the fucking black community, and they're calling these people out. And that's the problem with it is white Marxist liberals are pushing this political agenda, and then the political people at the top are taking advantage of it, trying to weaponize it to push their agendas.
Is that really an issue with Marxism or just a racist
It's
people
Marxism
with
because
different political
white
ideologies?
liberals do not push that.
Good question, Cody, because that's what I was asking. I was like, Marxist and liberal, they're not the same thing. So you end up using these words to define people, but then people become ignorant. When I say ignorant, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean lack of knowledge. They then have lack of knowledge to what real Marxism is and what liberalism is. They just say, "Oh,
well, that's why I do it this way. It's the same reason. It's the same reason, right? What's the same reason they call the Trumpers Trump conservatives or the QAnon people? Marxism is extreme left, QAnon is extreme right, and it's more, you could tie in extremism into it, but the reason, again, I say Marxist liberal is because they're identifying as liberals, and they have taken liberal ideologies and turned them into Marxism. I just need to see more people like Steve, and then I'll say just Marxist. But unfortunately, there's so many liberals that are confused by Marxism and the fact that it has invaded their party that they're just letting these people in willingly. That's my problem with it.
Like, how are you defining Marxism? What aspects of Marxism do you think are connected to racism?
The fact that they're saying what they're saying, trying to get ideologies pushed through politically that harm the black community.
Like?
Well, one, saying that they're too dumb to get an ID. So basically, they're trying to make it, in my opinion, it's going to make it even harder for black people to vote, because the ones that do absentees or signature validation, now they're saying that they don't even need that anymore. And if you do all of that stuff, that's a problem, in my opinion.
I think what Wolf is referring to is the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes, that
is telling people that, you know, we're going to lower the testing requirements for racialized black folk because, you know, whatever reason, you know, for the rest of us, we're like, why? They're not less smart than everybody else.
And affirmative action did that shit because it had good intentions, but it destroyed black progress as well, because now they're making it to where black kids with 2.0 GPAs don't even have to have the qualifications anymore to go to prestigious schools. Then they fail out. And then what happens? They end up with no degree and a shitload of debt.
Well, Thomas Sowell talked about that very specifically. He talked about mismatching the college to the student. Yep. So if you send someone with a 2.5 GPA to Harvard or to MIT, they're going to fail because you're talking about like the creme de la creme of education. You know what I mean? Where they could have excelled in other schools that were more aligned with their abilities. I can't name any. I don't know all the colleges out there, but I remember his specific argument was MIT. He used that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, then they fail out of college, and then they just lose all hope, right? Instead of actually, you know, custom fitting our education to the student, which is how it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, see, I'm just a little confused on Wolf's point, but I agree with like the education and aiding people in learning based on whether they're visual, verbal learners, etc. I just think that Wolf, the gist that I got from Wolf is he's explaining people with like more egalitarian ideas, but who still hold on to ableist and sanist beliefs, including one like racist beliefs based in ableism.
I think where Wolf is driving at Marxism is him basically saying when the left says instead of saying it's a class warfare, you say it's a race warfare, oppressor versus oppressed. There's a binary, you know, the black people are the oppressed, the white people are the oppressors, I think that's the sense in which it was using the term Marxist. And
But the thing about Marxism in its basic core is sure, it looks at class. It was created because you had the bourgeoisie who are oppressing the people, but it is 100% against private ownership. So there is no form of freedom to have private businesses, which is why I always find it funny when people say Marxist liberal, because Marxism is 100% against capitalism and liberalism. That's why I think it's a confusing
which is
term when
something
you
that
start using it.
Isn't that
I can
something that
explain
the left is pushing, that government should take on so many responsibilities that people shouldn't be able to do things for themselves?
Here in the US, yes.
That's towing the line
But
of
they're
Marxism.
still holding on to their constitutional rights, though, Charles. So the freedom to, as individuals, to freedom of speech, the freedom to bear arms, the capitalism, being able to make business.
That's
that
the
goes
conservative
against
argument.
Marxism.
Yes, that's the conservative argument, and the lefties are arguing against such things. They are arguing against, people being able to own their guns, or some of those freedoms. They are censoring people. They are canceling people left, right, and center. So they are towing the line towards Marxism. It might not be full blown Marxism, but you can definitely see the Marxist elements there. They're just replacing class with race.
You can smell the fire. You just can't tell where it's coming from. Is the best way I could describe that in what Wolf is trying to get to. Is like it smells incredibly similar, even though, again, like what we've been talking about today, it's hard to prove exactly where it is. It is there, but I'd have to spend a significant amount of more time to try and to explain why he says the things that he's saying, because I don't think he's wrong. I'm actually in full agreement with him, because it's something that I study and read intensely on. But it's a conversation for another time, to say the least.
Yeah. And I think Charles hit the nail on the head when he said. Sorry, I want to say, I think Charles said the right thing in replacing class with race. I think, that's an important way of, I think if Wolf were to say that, then I think I would understand it better.
Sorry, are you saying that the Marxists are replacing class with race?
No, I think that if Wolf was saying that, then I would understand the point that he was trying to make. If he were to say that, the way that he was trying to describe Marxist liberals, I was a little lost on, but I think if Charles made the point of adding the caveat of trying to explain so-called Marxists were replacing class with race, I think that I would understand Wolf's point better. I'm not exactly sure if that's 100% true, but if Wolf said that, then I think I would understand what he meant.
I think he is, because and this is something that Dr. Mason's touched on with culture is that we presume culture to mean race.
Yeah.
So there's and when we presume that
class with race.
Right, it's not a hard argument to get from there to class. It's really not.
Larry, go on.
It's just important that when certain people go against Marxism, it's important to know that some of the most influential organizations in, say, your country's history, well, you probably don't support them, had Marxism. Like Black Panther Party didn't have a problem with socialism, Marxism, even Maoism. So I think it's important that people can criticize Marxism if they don't like it, but it's important that they actually understand what Marxism is, why it was created. It was created as a response to deal with the exploitation from the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy. And I think a lot of people who jump on the bandwagon to attack Marxism don't know that. I mean, I have 100%, my reservations about it.
True.
I have my reservations. No disagreement here. I find most people, I just find most people who either come to attack liberalism, Marxism, socialism, I don't think they understand the basics of what those things are. I'm not saying they need to be professors and give some PhD explanation, but just understand the basics and why those things came about. But I think it's reached identity politics where you just call people, oh yeah, I mean, in England, they use the term liberal lefties. It's like, what? It's like people and the funny thing is the people who complain about the liberal left, they support the NHS and they support the welfare state, which exists in UK, which was created by the Labour Party in the 40s, who were filled with socialists and communists. So it's like, I don't know. It's I don't know. But like you said, maybe a different debate some other time, some other day.
No, I agree with you, Leary. That's why, see, I wasn't entirely on board with what Wolf was saying because it seemed like he was using Marxism just as a name caller in the abstract sense. So that's why I wasn't exactly sure what he was talking about.
Well, I've been talking to him a little bit about it, and I'm trying to help him understand it. And it's a process. He's, like I said, he's not wrong. I think probably we could work on his explanative skills, but he's not wrong. It's just that it's a process. He's in the middle of a process. So I'll continue to work with him on it, though.
All right. So final question to Steve. This was a question I asked earlier, which you said you didn't get. So it's about the Roland Fryer study on police brutality. Okay, so there are two things that you can take away from that study. One, black people were disproportionately uh, treated, as in the use of force on black people was disproportionate to white people. But his study also showed that bla- black people were not killed at a rate any more than white people. So in terms of killing people, there was no disparity. But in terms of using unnecessary force, there was actually a disparity that showed that black people were targeted more. Now, conservatives love to quote this from Fryer study, but they skip the part of the violence part, and they just go straight to C. They are not killing black people any more than they are killing white people. So there's nothing to show here. But to me, it seems very disingenuous that they will skip that. So what would you say to that?
There's a lot there, Charles. um, what I would say is that when we look at these types of situations, we have to view them not through a lens of bias, so to speak. We have to look at these issues through a lens of curiosity and to try and discover why these disparities seem to exist in the first place, right? It's a proven fact that you're more likely to have more run-ins with police officers if you live in
No,
poverty.
no, no. This is not about poverty. This is
Okay,
about
maybe I'm not understanding your
use of
question then. I'm sorry.
force. See, let's say you have caught a black person, you've caught a white person for the same crime, but the use of force, the police were more likely to be forceful, to use force, not deadly force. They're more likely to use force on the black person than a white person. That's what the study showed. But also,
Hmm.
the study also showed that the police, if they had to shoot, if they had to discharge their weapons, they were not more likely to kill a black person than a white
Correct.
person. But up until the point where they used deadly force, they were actually much more forceful on black people. So it had nothing to do with rates of criminal behavior and all that.
Right. The why question is left out of there. Um, it's hard to say. I mean, do I don't know. I don't know why. Okay, so let's if we're going to assume that both of the individuals, both racialized black and racialized white, behave the same way, yet racialized black are being beaten up more, with the excessive use of force by police, right? Then we definitely know that we've got an issue. But what I find in those kind of cases where they have a study saying this, if they don't mention how we got from A to C, it's hard to really take them seriously. Does that make sense? It's difficult to say why. I mean, you could put in there the racial component, sure, but unless we have metrics in which to measure how that did affect the outcome, it's difficult to say. I'm always going
But
to lean
at times, the simple answer or the obvious answer is the right answer.
right. Well, it's more than possible to assume that racism did play a role in that. I don't think you could escape that because we haven't escaped the concept of race yet. And so when we're looking at those situations, I mean, obviously there can be a disparity there, but really there's a I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's, sorry?
Maybe what we need to do, maybe we need to go back and study that paper itself. I think I'll
I
find
think
it and
so,
see
yeah.
how we can, so that we'll be much more objective and clearer in our analysis, so we don't just give things off what we're thinking. You get. So this would be a good place to end the stream for today.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful one. Thank you all so
Can I
much.
ask him real quick?
Okay, go ahead.
So is the question as to why racialized black people may be treated more harshly than racialized white people by the police?
Yes.
Okay, my initial hypothesis would be something I mentioned earlier, which is ableist and sanist beliefs projected against racialized black people. The assumption that people who are racialized as black are somehow inherently less intelligent or less sane and thus cannot be reasoned with, and thus need to be controlled through use of force or violence. I think that's the main reason why is that if you don't believe that you can reason with somebody or talk to somebody down from a hostile situation, you're going to use force or violence. I think that's the main reason, or at least the most likely explanation.
That's the definition of racism in its purest form. When you think that you can't reason with someone because their mental capacities are diminished or they're animals, so you have to use force. So that's racism in its pure distilled form.
Yep. So that's my initial hypothesis as to the reason why.
I would go with Cody's on that one. I think Cody puts it more succinctly than I could have.
Thank you.
Right. So just closing words for today. Cody, Steve, then Larry, then we're done.
Oh, just see. As to the title of the video, what's the face of anti-black racism today? That depends on who you ask, because there's a lot of different definitions for what black or blackness means, and there are again a lot of negative definitions and stereotypes projected against people who are racialized as black. So you need to understand that there is no universal definition for race or racism, and that every situation you likely need to pick apart, which sadly takes a lot of stress, but is the utmost necessity. Thank you.
Yeah.
In regards to the question, I would say it says, "What's the face of anti-black racism today?" I chose to point out the face of anti-black racism through a number of ways. The first way, I believe it is through unfair treatment of people, and I believe that the black people being treated unfairly. I showed what happened in Ukraine, how they were not letting the Africans get on the train. They wouldn't let the African woman get on the train, but they let the Ukrainian woman get on the train. Then they had all the Africans standing outside the border in the freezing cold, even the African with her daughter, whereas they didn't do that with whites. I then tried to prove the point through the UK judicial system, providing sources on judges who were taking the judicial system to a tribunal because they felt, those 8 judges felt that the judicial system on sentencing was unfair. I then provided data on the Sentencing Commission, which said that people from black and ethnic minorities were being treated fairly in the way they were being handed out, the way they were handing out punishments. So I think the face of anti-black racism today, it's always been the same. It's unfair treatment of particular people because of their skin color, their ethnicity, and it manifests itself in different ways, from judicial system to the way people were treated in prisons. I gave the data for black women in the UK being incarcerated at a higher rate than their white counterparts. So that's what I came to my conclusion to.
The question, what's the face of anti-blackness? I can't help but keep going back to this example that I have in my head of, race being a bullet in a gun, right? And the gun itself is discrimination. Well, or I should say that race is the bullet that we put in the gun of discrimination, and we shouldn't be surprised when it goes off, right? Because we put that bullet in there. We put race in there to be used and weaponized. And it seems to me that the best thing that we could possibly do is to remove race completely, in the sense of, you know, really working hard to end this belief that races are different, that races actually exist in the first place, because they don't. And then we seem to love to conflate race and class and culture. And until we get out of that paradigm of thinking, we're never going to see the end of what you would consider anti-Black racism, because we keep loading the damn gun with the ammunition needed to keep perpetuating it. And so that would be my opinion on that specifically. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Cody for that, for their response earlier. It was an absolutely brilliant response, and I absolutely appreciate and love Cody's intellect. I really, really do. I love the way they think about things. And also, great recording, by the way, Cody. I loved it. Had my wife comment on your video. It was awesome. I loved it a lot. But Larry, I wanted to express my gratitude to you, because I love the way that you're thinking about this, where you're not taking sides. You're actually you're diving into it very unbiased in the sense of you're investigating all of the information that you can get your hands on, not just confirming what you might already suppose, which is, you know, the core of the scientific method. You know what I mean? And I love the fact that you're thinking about these things and we're talking about these things. And I love the fact that you're here talking about those things. And I appreciate the fact that your name in Yoruba means witness. I love it, because you are in the U.S. we have a saying here, I'm going to witness, which means you're going to testify. You know, in church, it's I'm going to bear witness, is to testify to your beliefs. And that's what you're doing here. You're bearing witness to what you are seeing, and trying to find an explanation, or even find a possible solution or cure for that problem. So I want to voice my appreciation to you, and Charles, I want to voice my appreciation to you for having us here and giving us an opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Thanks for what you said. It was a pleasure talking to you, Steve, and Cody. I just wanted to point out, Steve's the first person who figured out what the name actually means. And ironic, it was a white guy. It wasn't a Black guy and an African. All this time I've been on, he's the first person who figured out what the word meant. Oh my gosh.
I'm jealous, because I'm trying to learn Yoruba myself, so I appreciate the education on the definition.
Good one, Steve. So thank you guys for today. The viewers, thank you very much for coming. Dr. Mason, thank you very much for your generous contribution. Really appreciate it. Steven, my patron, thank you very much. I appreciate your support always. Cody, thanks for coming. Your voice was excellent. Mr. Pelu, Wolf, Stanley, every other person that came, and then Larry. Larry was just on point today. I loved your clinical approach to this thing. You know, you're just giving the facts and drawing conclusions solely based on the facts that were before you, and not some sort of personal influences. And so I think that's the way we should approach things. Like I said earlier, I don't think we're living in a post-racial world. Heck, as long as race exists, somehow racism would always exist. You understand? But we have to call it out when it is true, not cry wolf when there is obviously something else that can explain the disparity. We can't just say it's racism. So that's the place I'm coming from. So people on the right might say, oh, well, racism doesn't exist. It's not a problem. Well, it does. People on the left might say, oh, racism is all that exists. Well, it isn't. So the middle ground is where truth really is. And that is what we should all look forward to. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll catch you in another live stream. So it's bye for now.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.